So welcome everybody to Torogi Talk, where we attempt to unpackage anything and everything Igorot. Whether it's through story or discussion, we hope to increase the awareness of our people and hopefully inspire others to seek out a greater understanding of our culture, just as we are. Today we have quite a special guest. Mark, would you like to introduce our guest here?
Sure. So today we have Dr. David Shearer and
Richard.
sorry, Dr. Richard Shearer. Sorry, David. Why did I say that? But Dr. Richard Shearer, and today he's gonna talk a little bit about migration, a little bit about language, and how it all fits in terms of the history of the Cordillera. And he is a graduate from the UP College of Medicine, and his interest in the Cordillera stemmed from his relationship with his grandfather, who was an administrator in the early colonial government of the Cordillera. Dr. Scherer?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mark. I've been asked to speak on the tribal origins in the Cordillera, and my talk is going to be based on a study of languages. That study is called linguistics, and the people that engage in that science are called linguists. And the first thing I want to make clear is I am not a linguist. So what I'm going to tell you today is secondhand information told to me by people who are linguists. And the two most important of them for me are one, my grandfather, who was a linguist, professor at the University of the Philippines, and he did most of his studies on Cordillera languages. But he was also an administrator in the very early American takeover of the Cordillera from the Spaniards. And the second thing is that my grandfather passed away a while ago, but I've had the fortune of having extended conversations with a person who, while not a Filipino, spent many years in Bontoc and is probably the leading expert on Philippine languages. His name is Lawrence Reed, and I'll show you some of his slides in a while. So languages. The first thing to do, I think, is to just get a very simple, basic understanding of linguistics, and it's not going to be very complicated. The first idea I'd like to present there is that languages change. They change even if you're a group of people living in an island in the middle of an ocean and nobody ever meets you. Over generations and centuries, your language will change. Okay, so as you look at this, you wonder what the heck this is, what language is this? Well, this is English. It's English from 1,000 years ago. It's called Old English, and it's almost unrecognizable to you now. But that's how languages change, right? Now, how do we use this idea of how languages change to look at Cordillera migration? Next slide. Okay, so if you follow from the upper left down to the lower right, we'll see that a group of people whom we'll call A, speaking a language called A, settled in a river valley called A. And they were very successful and their population grew. And at some point, they realized that they couldn't all live in that one place. So a hardy group of them decided to cross over a very difficult mountain trail over to the other side of the mountain, and where they found another river valley that they could that they could settle. So now you had two groups of people speaking language A on opposite sides of a very difficult to cross mountain range. Because languages change at some point, and you go down to the lower left, the languages will vary, and I mark them as language A1 and language A2, and some people will call those dialects. If you got a person speaking A1 together with a person speaking A2 for one reason, they'll be able to understand each other, although one will probably say to the other, gee, you talk funny. However, as more generations and years go by, the languages diverge so much that what you get are two different languages now. You get a language A and a language B, and I put them out in green because neither of those two languages resembles the first language, which I put in red, of language A, which is very much like that Old English that I put up in the last slide. Now, At this point, if you got a person from the A group together with a person from the B group, they would not understand each other. The very definition of languages is that the two groups will be mutually unintelligible. All right, so it's at this situation in the lower right that the linguist comes in, and he'll look at those two languages and he'll say, I think these languages have some similarities. And he'll explore those similarities to try to figure out what they have in common. Now, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, and here we are again. Now, this is English, and can you guess what it's saying since it's English? Well, you've all been to church. This is the Our Father. And you'll notice that it starts with Father and then goes to Our. So instead of Our Father, it's Father Our. And then on that first line, you could probably figure out earth and heaven, the words earth and heaven. Second line, you could probably figure out the word name, and so forth and so on. So the linguists can look at this and look not just at the words, but the grammar, how those words are put together, and also how they're pronounced, what they call phonology. Okay, and they can take the green A and green B, figure out that they're similar, and also figure out that the common language that gave rise to both of them, what was the red A? That process is called Reconstruction. And from Reconstruction, they can figure out that not only are A and B both derived from language A, but they can figure out that language A was the origin. So you can then say that group B speaking language B, that group of people originated in area A. And that's how you can figure out how people move around the area using language. Okay, so now if these language A and B are actually related, they will have an ancestral language in common. That's called the proto-language. And because they're related, they share some things in common with each other. So if you and I had the same grandfather, we'd both be related. So A and B are related through a proto-language that no longer exists. They reconstructed it. They tried to figure out what it was like. Okay. Now, so therefore, languages have families. The most famous of the families globally is Indo-European, which is where the Western languages are Spanish and English, etc., and French and German. They came from. Okay. The Philippine language also belonged to a family. And that family is called Austronesian, which stands for Southern Islands. Sorry, there you go. Okay, now this is the spread of Austronesian. The Austronesian languages are the most widespread area-wise throughout the world, as you can see, but most of that area is water. But you can see that the Austronesian languages stretch all the way from Madagascar, if you remember that movie, which is off the coast of Africa, all the way to the right, and if it shows up there, you'll see Easter Island, I'm sorry. So you can take a person from Easter Island and introduce him to a person from Madagascar, and they can count to 10, and they'll kind of, understand each other. That's how wide the spread of Austronesian is. Now, the other thing that's in this map is arrows. You see the red arrows, and that marks how the linguists think the language spread through this area. So if you reverse the arrows and follow it back to the origin, that origin is Taiwan. So around 4,500 years ago, some people in Taiwan started migrating out of there, and eventually their language through their descendants spread all over this area. Okay, this is an old slide. It's Japanese. And the reason I chose this slide is because the Japanese did not call that place Taiwan. They called it Formosa. That was the name of the island in Japanese times. And the linguists, in order to distinguish Taiwanese, which is a Chinese language, from the original Aboriginal languages of that island, they called those Aboriginal languages, Formosan languages. Okay, so that's why I put that name up. So you'll see that Formosa is not that far away from Luzon, and the Aboriginals that lived in the southern end of Formosa were fishermen, and they were very good navigators, and they eventually made their way down to Luzon, perhaps stopping in the Batanes, perhaps not. That's still not clear. But that is a very dangerous crossing. A lot of people have died trying to make that boat trip in their big bangkas from Taiwan to Luzon, but they eventually made it. If you're wondering, I guess, what the relationship is linguistically, I can only I'll just give you one example. Okay. In Taiwan, if you've seen a banana tree grow, the bananas line up in rows down the stalk. And if you've just seen a banana in a store, you'll see it's kind of like a double row, sort of an intertwined double row. So it looks sort of like if you put your two hands together and you had your fingers there, that's what the banana would look like. So the word for that row of bananas originally was pulu, and that eventually became the Formosan word for 10. So then the language drifted down to the Philippines, and then you had to think, well, okay, that's fine, it's 10, but then how do you say 20? And then they said, okay, well, the way you say 20 is you say 2 tens, and 3 tens, and 4 tens, and 5 tens. So the word in the Formosan language for 1 is sa. So to say 110, you would say sa pulu. But because the Philippine languages use what they call ligatures, like for example, in English you'd say beautiful woman, but in Tagalog you can't say maganda babae. It doesn't work. You have to put the ligature there and you have to say magandang babae. So instead of, you can't just say 110, you can't say sa pulo, you have to throw in the ligature and you go sa nga pulo, sanga pulo. And sanga pulo, for those of you who speak Illocano, is the Illocano for 10. Now, the Tagalogs decided that that's too long a word, so they shortened it to sampu. So if you speak Tagalog, that's where your sampu comes from. And if you follow that thing straight down through the Visayas and into Indonesia, that pulu shows up there, all the way from Madagascar to the Eastern Island. Okay, so now, the similarities are not just in language between Formosa and the Cordilleran languages. This, for example, is a display case, which you would figure you see in the Baguio market, or the Easter weaving school or something like that. But this is from Taiwan. This is a display in a Taiwanese indigenous store. And if you were in Benguet, you'd say, sure, that's a kayabang. That's a backpack that instead of being strapped around your shoulders, is strapped to your head. And you'll see the head strap there at the bottom. But you'll also see in that little note there that it's all written in Chinese, because this is from Taiwan. And this beautiful view of rice terraces, this is from Taiwan. Again, now, just pause here for a second to diverge a little bit and talk about the tribal names. So the most famous rice terraces are in Ifugao. And where does that name come from? Well, in the cosmology of the Ifugao, there are 3 worlds. There's the sky world populated by gods. There's the earth world populated by us, the humans. And there's the underworld populated by the Anitos. And that underworld is really a parallel universe to the earth world. Now, in Ifugao, the earth world is called Pugao. And so in the classic Austronesian construction, if you are from Pugao, you are I Pugao. Okay, and so that's where the name came from, and that's really the way to pronounce. I don't know how it ended up being Ifugao, but maybe the Bontocs had something to do with it, I don't know. In Tagalog, the mountain range is called a golot. And so if you are from the golot, then you are I Golot, and that's where Igorot came from. And Baloy is the other side of the river. So if you're from the other side of the river, I presume they mean the Agna River, then you are I Baloy. Okay. And in Bontoc, because they like that F sound, you are Ifuntok. That's how it goes in Bontoc. All right, so now, having said that, the next slide I'm going to show is from Ifugao. This is a Canao, and no self-respecting Canao is complete without a head. So there's your head in the middle, and you'll notice that the village is all out because this is a big celebration. And while the villagers are standing in the background, you look beyond them and you see the rice terraces. Now, the fellow on the left side of the screen whose back is to you, he has just disemboweled a pig. And the reason he disemboweled the pig was to take its gallbladder so he could then present it to the people squatting on the right side of the screen. And those are the village elders. And they're going to look at the gallbladder for omens. I'm presuming, I don't know for a fact, this might be a harvest festival. But at any rate, that's the whole ceremony, the whole tradition, the whole ritual, for purposes of, I don't know, authentication, or to make it work, you need a head. So the people of the Cordillera were headhunters. But actually, before the Spanish came, most of the people in the Philippines were headhunters. What the Spanish did was they were able to take control of the lowlands, and so they abolished headhunting in the lowlands. But they could not abolish it in the mountains because the mountain people were just too fierce for them. They could not control the mountains, with the exception of Benguet and the Abra. Okay, now, if you showed this picture to a person from Taiwan, he'd say, what, only one head? So I'll show you the next picture. And this is from 1930 in Taiwan. And by 1930, headhunting was done and almost completely eliminated by the Americans in the Cordillera. But it was still going on in Formosa. And the heads in the front of the picture belong to the people from one village. And those heads were taken by the people in the back who belonged to another village, because warfare in Taiwan, as the same as warfare in the Cordillera, was inter-village. There's no point in an Ifugao traveling days and days to get a head from Kalinga when he could just get a head from his neighboring village. Okay, so the concept of tribe did not exist. Your identification was with your village, and that word is an Illocano word, is ili, and so your fellow village mates were your kailian. Okay. And that was your identification. There was no concept of belonging to a tribe. Okay, so the people from Formosa landed in the Philippines. They landed in northern Luzon, and they found the Cagayan River. Okay, and so they set up their populations there. And then as their populations grew and they needed to expand, they followed the Cagayan River down. And then you'll see somewhere there, past Gataran, you'll see a branch. So the main Cagayan River is called the Rio Grande de Cagayan, or the Big Cagayan River. But there is a smaller branch, which was called the Rio Chico de Cagayan, small Cagayan River. So it's now known as the Chico. So that group followed the Chico River into the mountains. Okay. A second group followed the Cagayan River all the way down to Ilagan. And then from there, they discovered the Magat River. And they followed that Magat all the way into the southern part of the Cordillera. So there are two groups of migrants into the Cordillera: the people that follow the Chico River, and those were called, they went into Central Cordillera, so they were called the Central Cordilleran Group. And the people that followed the Magat, and they ended up in the southern part of the Cordillera, so they were known as the Southern Cordilleran Group. Okay, so what are the Cordilleran languages? Well, first, this is a geographically and politically defined term. Okay, it covers languages that are spoken in the Cordillera Central or in the Cordillera Administrative Region. But linguistically, there are two major groups that can be called Cordilleran, but they include a few languages that are not spoken in the Cordillera Central. So those two groups following the two rivers are the southern, that follow the Magat, and the central that followed the Cordilleran language. I'd like to mention at this point that that expert in Philippine languages I told you who lived many years in Bontoc, his name is Lawrence Reed, and this is one of his slides. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the breakdown of the language groups. And so the Formosan people started off in northern Luzon near the mouth of the Cagayan River. And then a group of them, what you'll see on the right side, spread out to give rise to many different languages. Northeastern Luzon, that's the Sierra Madre. Cagayan Valley languages are Ibanag and Itawis and the like, and Illocano. Then we go into the Cordillera, and those people are called South Central Cordillera. And these are not languages. These are the estimates of what the languages sprang from, some old proto-language. Okay, and then they split into the southern and the central Cordillera. And so the question is migration. How did the South Central Cordilleran languages get to where they are now? They began as a single language thousands of years ago. Remember, we talked about that, the origins of languages. But where it was spoken and what roots did they take, which ultimately resulted in all the languages spoken today, that's the question. Many theories have been proposed, but most are only speculative. So we're going to take a look at what Lawrence Reed thinks is how this migration happened. So the river valleys were the key migration routes, because that's where people settle and they grow their crops and live. And then when they get very populated, they move on. So the first settlers to move into northern Luzon found the great Cagayan River Valley that was occupied by many groups of Negrito people. The Negritos came to the Philippines from the south. They migrated from what is now what they call Sundaland, which is somewhere in the Indonesia, Malaysia area, and migrated north. But they were not as developed, I guess you could say, and so eventually they yielded to the people that came in from Taiwan. And so there are still Negritos in the Philippines now, but their language has been lost, and they now all speak Austronesian languages. Okay, so those that settled in the Cagayan River Valley gave rise to the Cagayan Valley languages, and the others moved south. So it's the others that we're going to talk about. Okay, so the first major tributary that they found was the Chico River. And this is where the South and the Central Cordilleran languages divided into what became two groups. So the parent of the Central Cordilleran group moved up the valley and into its tributaries, leaving behind the Kalinga Itneg group. So if you just look at the map, once you follow that Chico, the first group, the first province that you'll see in the Cordillera is Kalinga. Okay. The Itneg is an interesting thing because some people claim that the Apayao are really Itneg, but the Itneg eventually made their way all the way to Abra. So maybe they left the group in Apayao, or maybe they settled in Abra and then moved back over to Apayao. I don't know. Okay. Others moved further up the Chico to where Bontoc and Cancanay are now spoken. Okay, so we're back to here again. So we're talking now about the group that split up and followed the Chico deep into the Cordillera. Then he says, but there was one group who moved on, probably following the tributary, which meets the Chico River at Bontoc. I couldn't find a really good river map, but I guess if you Google it, you'll find out where the tributaries of the Chico are. Okay, so that group left behind a group that developed into the Talubin language of Bontoc, then over Mount Polisadel and down the river valleys to become the Ayangan and Tuwali Ifugao languages. The southern Cordilleran settlers moved on down the Cagayan until they reached the Magat. The first settlers left behind were the ancestors of the Ilongot and Bugkalot people, them in Nueva Vizcaya, and then a group of settlers moved further up the Magat, leaving behind the ancestors of the Ibaloy and the Kalanguya groups. And this last one is where some people don't agree with Lawrence Reed. He said one group discovered the headwaters of the Agno and moved down into the lowlands, forming now the Pangasinan language. So if you go by Lawrence Reed, there is the Pangasinan, that lowland language is actually a Cordilleran language. Okay, so once again, just to show you where the people who follow the Magat River ended up here, then you see the arrows heading straight for Baguio City. Okay, so the southern and central Cordilleran languages came from a common ancestor, probably spoken in northern Cagayan province thousands of years ago. The major river valleys were the pathways of spread into the Cordillera. Some families settled and others moved on. So if you were settled early in the Chico, you were probably ended up being called the Kalinga. Dialect changes in one group eventually became separate languages. And these are today the Cordilleran language. Okay, and now here are the Cordilleran languages. If you look on the right side, the central Cordillera, you'll note that most of the Cordilleran languages we know today came from this central Cordilleran group. So Isinay, Ifugao, Ifontok, Malangao, Kankanay, Kalinga, and Itnig. On the other side, the southern Cordilleran, the one big group is the Ibaloy, who settled in southern Benguet. There are smaller groups, the Carao and the Kalanguya. But then there's Pangasinan. Then the other thing to note is how far away the relationship is between the Kankanae and the Ibaloy, even though they occupy the same province. And that shows you how divergent that migration was between the southern and the central Cordilleran languages. An Ibaloy will understand a person speaking Pangasinan much better than he'll understand a person speaking Kankanay, even though the Kankanay are their fellow province mates. It's not over though. If you notice on this slide, you'll see that there's not one Ifugao. There's many kinds of Ifugao, there's many kinds of Bontok, many kinds of Kalinga, many kinds of Itneg. So the languages continue to diverge even when they settled in their general geographic area because it's very mountainous. Okay, and some of these slides, well, I don't have it on the slides, but you'll see that some of these languages are more endangered than others, and that's the little colored dots in front of each language. If you're blue or green, you're in pretty good shape. If you're brown or yellow or something like that, in danger of disappearing. And here's a funny thing from this slide, and I've questioned Lori Reed about this. This slide puts what should be an Itneg language, they group it with the Kalinga. And that language is Banao, which is spoken in Balbalasan, which is one of the city areas in Kalinga. And the language really is different, but it's in the province of Kalinga. And so you wonder why that happens. And it happened because the provinces were set up not based on languages, but just roughly based on geography and politics, as Lori Reed mentioned in his slide. And the person responsible for that is this guy, Dean Conant Worcester. Dean Conant Worcester had, for an American, he had pretty good experience in the Philippines. He was in the Philippines doing extended zoologic investigations during Spanish times. So when the Americans took the Philippines, Dean Worcester was the leading American expert on this country that they really knew very little about. So he was part of the two Philippine commissions, and he eventually became the Secretary of the Interior. Well, the second Philippine Commission was headed by William Howard Taft, who was a very fat guy. He weighed about 350 pounds. And Manila was hot and he was dying. But Worcester had been told, he'd never been there, but he'd been told by the Spanish while he was there during Spanish times that there was a cool area in the northern Luzon mountains. So Taft dispatched him to find this cool area because the heat was killing them. So he went to Trinidad, which at that time was under American control, under the control of the American military. And from there in Trinidad, a German planter rode in and invited the group. There were several commissioners, two commissioners and their escorts there. And he invited the group to spend some time in his house, which was located 4 miles south of Trinidad in what was then a very tiny village or rancheria called Baguio. So here's the photograph commemorating that first visit of the Americans to Baguio. And you'll see Worcester over there, third from the right. And to his right is Luke Wright, who would succeed Taft as Governor General of the Philippines. And you probably know his name from Wright Park in Baguio. And then on the furthest left, seated down, that's the German that invited them to his house, which you see in the background. And that's my grandfather. So this house was located where Baguio City High School is now, if you know Baguio. Okay. And so because my grandfather spoke rarely at that time, he spoke English. Most of the white people in the Philippines then spoke Spanish. But he spoke English, and he also spoke Ibaloy and Illocano and some other languages. So they made him part of the colonial administration. He was the provincial secretary of Benguet. Benguet was the first province to come under civilian rule. The country was under American martial law at that time. And he had some problems with the American military because they thought he was an insurrecto. So he had to leave the country and go to Japan, and he had to earn a living. So he earned a living by teaching German, but he always had an interest in the Philippine languages. So he taught himself linguistics, and when he came back to the Philippines, he joined the University of the Philippines, and he became their first professor of Philippine linguistics. Okay, next slide. And this is what Worcester did. Worcester did not want the Philippines to become independent. So what he did when the Philippine Assembly was created in 1907, he tried to figure out a way to prevent the Philippine Assembly from touching the Cordillera. And what he did was he took all those old provinces and he put them all together into a mountain province. So this was the original mountain province. It's huge. It's that entire shaded area over there. And he made sure that the mountain province would not be controlled by the Philippine Assembly. He put that on himself. And so his idea was, as long as the Filipinos cannot control this area, they cannot get their independence because they cannot claim that the Filipinos are together as a nation. If I can keep the Cordillera people separate from the rest of the Philippines. So that was his tool to try to prevent Philippine independence. And you can see the mountain province included a couple of things that are no longer around. There's no longer an Amburayan province down there beside Benguet. And you'll notice that the Amburayan province stretched all the way to the coast because he didn't want the lowland governors who were at that time elected and were Filipinos to prevent commerce between his mountain province and the rest of the country. And similarly, up north, extended Apayao all the way down to the Babuyan Channel in Claveria. Okay, so because of this and because of his arbitrary drawing of those provincial boundaries, you end up with a lot of people who are, say, Kalinga, but they're not really Kalinga in terms of anything having in common, the most famous being the people of Balbalasan who speak a different language. So these provincial boundaries are Worcester created boundaries because the people at that time had no concept of tribe. Okay? There was no Ifugao tribe with a head Ifugao in that province. They were not organized as tribes. Okay, and that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you. So just like I showed you in the beginning, that thing of that strange language that you couldn't figure out, but it was English. So this may look strange to you, but this is Baguio. This is a view of Baguio taken from UP Baguio campus. Those buildings in the foreground are where Baguio City High is now. In between the two buildings, you'll see that flat area. That's the Cafaguay. That's Burnham Park now. And up in the hills in the distance is City Hall and Constabulary Hill and those places. Okay, so things change, languages change, places change. And sometimes they change for no really good reason, but that's a topic for another time. Okay, that's it. Thank you. If anybody would like to get further information, just my email address is right there. You can just send me an email. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shearer. That was a really very informative and very like just especially coming from the academia world for us lay people. That was pretty that was digestible. and
It's only because I'm not a linguist. If I was a linguist, I'd go deep into things like sound shifts, incontractable. So I'm not a linguist, so I can't explain linguistics to you. So that makes it a lot easier.
So,
But
Dr. Shearer, was wondering how did how did you amass that much knowledge into that? Because that seems like a lot of work, and it sounds like it's been like a passion that you've had for years.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. It all started. My father died in 1996, and going through his stuff, I found the documents signed by William Howard Taft, naming him Provincial Secretary of Benguet. So I decided at that time, my grandfather, I mean, so I decided at that time, it's like my grandfather maybe had an interesting life. So I started looking into his background, and eventually I'm going to write a book. The UP is inaugurating a library in 2022, and they're going to name it after my grandfather. So I wanted a book out by then. And since he not only lived in Baguio for 5 years, he kept coming back every summer because this was really his favorite place. And so, he wrote about the languages, so I read what he wrote and stuff like that. And eventually you start talking to all the people over there. In the course of your research, and of course my research is right into the book, you meet all these people, very knowledgeable about the Cordillera. That's how I accumulated this knowledge.
Wow, look forward to your book.
When is that book coming out?
Yeah, when do you think that might come out?
Well, the inauguration of the library is scheduled for August 13th, which is my grandfather's birthday, 2022, which is the 100th anniversary of the Department of Linguistics at UP, which he co-founded with T.H. Pardo de Tavera. So that's when it will come out. That's not all about the Cordillera, but a lot of it's going to be about the Cordillera, because even after he was no longer a colonial administrator, at one point he was governor of Batanes, but eventually he became a linguist and studied the Cordilleran languages. So there will be Cordillera in it.
So pick it up from your studies. It looks like since we're one of the closest grouping next to Taiwan, and we could see how that's gone out and become kind of like, you could see where it gone out to the Polynesian people, and also kind of like into areas where there's Indo-Malay and all that. It seems like we would be very much closest to kind of like some of those originating patterns.
Yeah, sure. It's from Taiwan to the Philippines. Now, the linguists are still debating whether it was from Taiwan to the Cagayan River and from there to everywhere else, or if other outrigger canoe riding Formosans had landed in other parts of the country at the same time and developed the languages that way. So this what I presented to you, those charts there, language charts there, those are on the basis of what they call language trees. The idea being that one language gives rise to two languages, and those two languages give rise to two more, etc. They're changing their ideas a little bit, and they're talking now about chains, about how one language, the people speaking one language might land in several different places and develop the languages there. And so you end up with chains. And the reason they come up with that is because it seemed the spread of the Formosan languages was very fast to the Philippines.
Wow.
And they had some doubts about whether it could have spread that fast based on a tree, sort of, this language gives rise to that language, which gives rise to that language model. That's all. So there's a lot of things that are still unsettled. However, they're fairly certain that everything started in Taiwan. And the archaeology and the genetics, well, I'll say the archaeology and the genetics don't disagree. Let me put it that way. The geneticists have not confirmed yet. They've confirmed the linkages. So if you look at that map of Austronesia that I put up, and if you take away the the points of the arrows. The geneticist will say, okay, the lines, yes, these people are related to these people, but the geneticists have not been able to figure out the migration path. You have to remember that prior to the 1980s, the standard thinking on the population of the Philippines is that it came from the south, that it came from Malaysia and Indonesia and up. And actually what happened, and this might be a source of confusion for some of the early people who are studying this, is that there was a back migration. So it went from Formosa to the Philippines to Indonesia and Malaysia. And then those people in Indonesia and Malaysia moved back and came up north. And they were the people that were in Manila at the time the Spaniards took over Manila. So for instance, if you remember that famous female spy, Mata Hari, she was Dutch, but Mata Hari are two Indonesian words that mean I and king. Okay, and so you put the two together, and they become with the ligature Matang Hari. So I of the I'm sorry, not Hari is not king. I'm sorry, sun. Eye of the sun in Indonesian. Okay. So eye of the sun meant noon. And so you go to Tagalog, and sure enough, the Tagalog word for noon is tanghali, the shortened form of mata ng hari. But hari is not king. Hari is not noon in Tagalog. Hari is king. Noon is, or sun. I'm sorry, not noon, sun. Let me backtrack. Mata and hari are eye of the sun, which means noon, matang hari. But in Tagalog, tanghali is noon, but in Tagalog, hari is not sun, it's king. So this Indonesian word snuck its way into the Philippine language at that time. And so that's why we have mata tanghali as noon, even though the hari or hari part is not means king in Tagalog rather than sun. Sorry, that was a complicated explanation, but the point being that those people from Indonesia back migrated into the Philippines and brought their language with them.
Wow, so that's really interesting because that makes that's a big shift for a lot of folks, because most, like you said, most people think that everybody just came from south and just kind of pushed everybody back up north. But so they're saying the most recent research is that folks actually came all the way from the north, then went back down. They went through the mountains, went back down south, went into Indonesia, Malaysia, and then came back up.
Came back up. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
is that,
makes a
are
lot of
we talking
sense.
about a time period of 3,000? This sounds like it might actually go further back, like 10,000 years.
Well, okay, the current thinking is that the Taiwanese moved to the Philippines around 4,000, 4,500 years ago. The Negritos moved up around 10,000 years ago. So the Negritos were there first. And yes, you're right. It seems like it's not that long a period of time, which is why they're thinking about more of a chain migration rather than, I'm sorry, a chain language spread rather than a tree type of language spread.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on the discovery of Homo Luzones? Because I've spoken to a gentleman who has a different theory. He's not academic or anything like that, but he mentioned this interesting theory that, in my opinion, I think he thought of it himself, but he believes that Australozones is the progenitor for the Igorot people, which goes against the whole idea of the Taiwan migration. What do you think of that?
Well, the Luzones is from the Callao caves, right? Isn't it in Cagayan? Is
I
that
believe
where
so.
they found
Yeah.
those bones? Yeah.
Mhm.
They found similar things, remember, in Indonesia. And it's quite possible that there was a sort of a hominid, is the word for it, a group of people that inhabited the Philippines and Indonesia at one time, and they died off.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the thinking of the people that support this. That those people do not give rise to the current crop of Filipinos. That they
Right,
died off
because
a long time ago.
there's no genetic what's it called, relationship between the current Filipinos and those that they found, correct?
Right. Yeah, I believe so. It's interesting, the genetics. There's actually, they found some 2,000-year-old skeletons in Samoa. And when they studied the genetics of those skeletons, they found that their closest relatives were Kalinga.
Wow.
So
Oh,
how
really?
the Kalinga got to Samoa, I don't know. But that's
Oh wow.
that was, it was just a couple of skeletons. So when you have what they're called anecdotal evidence, one of this, one of that, you have to
Exactly.
be a little bit careful.
Well, according to the research that you're talking about, it would kind of made sense because the folks in Kalinga, that was the early migration from Taiwan. They stayed in that area, and they claimed that part of the area near the river. And so I guess those who didn't go to Kalinga
Yeah,
probably took another
travel.
boat to Samoa.
They took another boat to Samoa. That's very possible. Or
Yeah.
or maybe there are skeletons along the way of their ancestors that we haven't found yet on the way from Apari to Samoa.
In some ways, the other thing I find interesting is like most of us in the mountain don't even know how to build boats anymore.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Once we found our home, we just said, oh, okay, we don't need to remember that. But
Yeah.
what I do know is that there are great architects, and builders of, obviously rice terraces and the early homes like that they built were, I mean, they didn't even use nails, they used rice
Yeah.
and pegs, and
Yeah.
the construction's pretty amazing. So they were definitely master craftsmen. I think most people at that time probably were, but then I just the fact that you can build those kind of long boats and just travel so far, that still boggles
That's
my
pretty
mind.
impressive. The
Yeah.
people that populated Madagascar came from Borneo, came from the Barito Valley in Borneo. But that's still a long drive, even if it's from Borneo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the whole Indian Ocean.
Yeah. Even
Yeah,
though
they had-
Africa's like right there, it doesn't make sense,
They had
eh?
to travel the Indian Ocean.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that you mentioned that some groups of people just totally like just gave up their original language and like, oh yeah, I think it was the Negritos. They gave up their original language and just
That's
took
right.
on.
They were dominated by the natives from Formosa, who had better, they had rice culture for one thing, So they were more prosperous. They could survive better than the Negritos. So eventually the Negritos adopted their language.
So
But the language the Negritos speak now is really Austronesian language.
and over thousands of years, they've just kind of
Yeah, they
just
just
developed.
they adopted the same way everybody else adopted, which is why we speak English.
I'm sure you've heard of the Naga people from northeast
Northern
India.
Yeah.
Okay.
The indigenous folks from the northeast, and their culture very very similar to the Taiwanese and to our group. Like they have their version of the Ato Ili, even their weavings, their everything, their headhunters. The only thing that
Tattoos.
the tattoos, everything in terms of culture was very identical, in terms of just society as well. But they found that like they don't speak any Austronesian in their language at all. There's not even any. There's barely traces left, or if there is any, from what they say is like there's none. And do you think that's in that case that's also a similar situation, that a group of folks from Taiwan could have moved to that area and just because they speak more of it's like a mix of a Tibetan language, I believe.
They
And
speak a Sino-Tibetan language.
Sino-Tibetan.
Okay. Yeah. Now the question was, where did those Taiwanese Aboriginals come from? Where did they come from? And that's subject to debate. But one of the theories is that they came from that Tibetan area. They came from Sino-Tibetan.
So they came from there. Okay.
So those people in India might have just been a group that branched off from the Tibetans who came down and populated Taiwan. Now that's controversial, and not everybody agrees with that. But that's one of the places they're looking at as the source of the Formosan.
Is there DNA like
That I don't
evidence?
know. I don't know how the connection was made using the growing of millet. Millet is a kind of, it's like a rice,
Mhm.
and the millet is the varieties of millet in that Sino-Tibetan area are similar to the millet that was grown in Taiwan. That's
Oh, that's gonna be. Gonna have to
that
wait
you
for
know
that research to come out.
it's you have to triangulate. You have to take multiple data points and mesh them together to try to come up with some sort of common thing. That's why even though we base now our idea about Austronesian migration on language, you also have to look at the culture, the archaeology, the pottery and stuff like that, and the DNA. Yeah, so I don't know. That seems like a long drive from Taiwan to northern India.
Yeah, because that kind of makes sense in terms of the slide number 2, I believe, that you're showing us in
The
terms of
English
how.
one?
Oh no, sorry, number 3.
Yeah.
The example with the mountains and whatnot.
The
'cause
mountains, yeah.
They're
Yeah.
complete other side of the Himalayas, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really went over the mountain. My God.
Yeah. Well, those mountains could also, black triangles could also represent ocean,
Yeah.
which is
that's-
how the spread went,
true.
Easter Island, Hawaii, Guam, that's all. And New Zealand. So the big countries that are in the Austronesian group are Philippines, Indonesia, Malaya, Madagascar, New Zealand. And then after that, it's all a bunch of islands.
Wow.
What's your take? I know you're not a linguist, but what's your take on bouncing off of the whole Naga people of Nagaland? But there was a kingdom in southeast India called Kalinga. It was the Kalinga Empire, but
Mhm.
they have no relation to the Kalinga people. How do you think that happened?
Well,
Besides, like,
there's
chance.
when you study languages, you have to be aware of the possibility that two languages having similar words, that those words are just by accident, they're the same words. By the way, a lot of the tribal names, including Kalinga, are what are called exonyms. In other words, people themselves did not give themselves that name. Other people gave them that name.
Right.
Kalinga means enemy.
Enemy,
So obviously the Kalinga did not name themselves.
But they adopted it.
Yeah, what
That's
happened
true.
is the Spanish, when the Spanish came and they started following the Chico River, they brought as their interpreters the Gadan, who were further, down in the lowlands, the Gadan people.
Oh yes.
And the Gadan people started telling them what the names of these people were. So I guess
Those
the
are the Kalinga.
Gadans were enemies, so Gadan called them
So-
enemies.
Then the Ibalois were the ones on the other side of the river then, right? Is that
Well, it's interesting that the Baloy means other side of the river. The question is, what river is it? Now, supposedly the Ibaloy started off on the eastern side of the Agno River, and then moved west into and of course they split up, but the languages are still pretty much the same. There's a little bit of a difference in pronunciation. But the one of the great stories is that the Ibaloy living in the original Kabayan area would travel through the territory of the Ibaloy that had settled nearer to Baguio in order to raid the lowlands. And so the people living near Baguio got mad. And so they said, we're not going to let you. They started fighting. And the peace pact was, so it was reported, each chief, the famous chief of the Ibaloy is Amkidit. I forget the name of the one from Kabayan, but in order to achieve peace, each of them killed one of their slaves, took the blood of each slave, mixed it in a cup, and they each drank from the cup.
Beautiful.
So that's sort of like folktale, not folktale, but oral history.
It's
I'll
possible.
ask my mom about that.
I mean, peace packs are funny that way, and then they probably dance for weeks and weeks and weeks doing the binging or something like that.
That's right,
Yeah, dance and drank for like when those kind of peace packs happen, then you gotta.
It would have been heavily tied to their spirituality So,
Yeah.
which we call superstition, but that's spirituality.
No, sorry. Speaking on their spirituality bit a little bit, it's funny you say that because I just spoke to a lowlander from Manila, who I thought was always like a Tagalog, but he's actually like from Bicol. But
Hmm.
he's a fairly secular person, but he identifies heavily through Catholicism. And in our conversation, he was speaking about his family history, and it was almost talking about like a family myth about how his great grandfather or great uncle married a spirit, and he was just talking about it as if it's some like real history, and to me that was kind of interesting. So
Yeah, married a spirit. Well, now, of course, the very famous figures in Ifugao, the carved figures, which people mistakenly call Anito, and they're really Bulul.
Mm.
Uh,
mm,
the Anito are the spirits that inhabit that underworld, which is sort of a parallel universe. And if you, by mistake, the member of the human Earth world, uh, bump into and anger one of those spirits,
Oh,
they
yeah.
come into you and they make you sick. And the way to
mm,
cure that sickness is you make this carving and you call the local priest, and through incantations, which involve the sprinkling of blood and stuff like that, you try to get the evil spirit that resides in you to transfer it to the figure, to the bulul,
Right. Right.
cure your illness that way. So now you've got a wooden carved figure with an evil spirit residing in it. And so what they do is they put that figure in their rice granary to guard their rice granaries. If anybody tried to steal their rice, the evil spirit would get them. That's the spirituality of that's the idea about spirits. None of the Cordilleran tribes had a concept of a creator.
Mm.
They had no concept that the earth was created. For them, the earth was just there. And then they lived based on what? And that is the starting point. There was an earth, and then man came and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been reading up on some of the stories, and some of the stories were that yeah, there was no like kind of like in Christianity where God created like 7 days that and then made this and that. It was just already existing, and then like the world was kind of flat. And this is the story. This is the story of earthquakes. Like the the one where the world is flat, and then the world is held up by four pillars, but on the at the bottom, when there's a big boar, and when the boar's back is itchy, it scratches its back on the pillar, and then that's what creates earthquakes. So I've been reading some of these stories, and I'm like, wow. So, and I've been looking for kind of like a creation story, but they do have that. They talk about there's Kapunyan, and then there's
mm.
Lumawig, and then there's like a lot of referred to as like deity heroes and stuff like that. But yeah, that's really
So
interesting.
we've never
Yeah.
really had like any creation myths, because that's actually different from what I've been told.
Oh, what have you heard?
Similar stories to ones from the lowlands, or even similar stories to those of Polynesians, but I've
Oh.
never really looked into it. And I think I remember being told like a creation myth where well where men and women came from, or like where we came from. Like
Yeah,
I've heard of
the
that one,
creation
right?
of
But
people, right?
Yeah,
I've heard that
not
people,
the
one.
that's it.
actual land.
Yeah,
I've never
Yeah.
actually thought about
but the creation of like
Yeah, the question
Well,
of the universe.
the universe is different.
Yeah.
There's like the
Yeah.
sun god, there's the moon god.
Mhm.
I'm actually more familiar with
interesting.
Polynesian creation myths, but I was told that it's sort of like attributed to that. I don't know.
Well, it's
I actually never really thought about that. Like I know there were origin myths, but not actual like creation myths. I've actually never heard of that. Interesting.
yeah, I need to go deep.
Well, then it
Apparently.
kind of works with a lot of like when you talk to the elders and they ask them, hey, how come that is the way it is? Or why is that the name? And then they just say, oh, that's just a name. Oh, oh no, it's just like that. That's
I mean, it's the same. It's a way of saying, oh, it is what it is.
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
no
So
answer.
Yeah.
it's just like maybe it's just like, why are you thinking about that? It's just there. Why are you thinking about that?
Well, actually, the concept of God Almighty or Kabunyan is probably not any older than when the time the Spaniards came in, right?
Interesting.
Because
Very interesting.
when you start seeing, you know, religious ideas that involve creator and the sun even or stuff like that,
Mhm.
you know that that's already some sort of influence of the Spanish on the things. I've been trying to figure out where Kabunyan originally came from. It certainly now means God Almighty, but I'm guessing it probably didn't in the old days. And the closest thing I've come is that in Kankanai, the word buni means pray. And in the classic Austronesian construction, ka as the prefix and an as the suffix means a place. So ka, buni, an might mean a place where people pray or have ceremonies or stuff like that.
And ka is
The
like a
Taiwanese,
word. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the Taiwanese heaven for Taiwan, for a Formosan Aboriginal, heaven is for him to get together with his ancestors. Where his ancestors dwell, that's heaven for him. That's where he wants to go when he dies. And in the northern tribe there in Taiwan, the way you get there is you cross a bridge.
Right.
And the only way to cross that bridge is to have the right tattoos. And for a man, those tattoos come when you take heads. So the more heads you take, the greater your chances that when you die, you will go to your ancestors, to the dwelling place of your ancestors. And that's what Mount Pulag is in Benguet from the old days. That's where the ancestors dwelled. So that's where they want. Now, in northern Benguet, near Mankayan, there is a Mount Kabunyan. And that's Kankanai territory.
Mount Kabunyan.
Yeah, it's Mount Kabunyan. So and the word in Kankanai for pray is buni. So you wonder maybe that's sort of the idea of that place.
Can you talk more about because you mentioned before we started recording how like the Benguet people they weren't headhunters compared to the more inner Cordillera folk.
Well, they were probably headhunters at one time, but that was a long time ago because the Spanish managed to get control of Benguet.
Can you talk more about the Spanish influences in Benguet itself? Because I'm Iboloy, and
Yeah.
I actually don't know much about like the actual the evolution of the Iboloy people in relation to Spanish influence in conjunction to the rest of the Cordilleras. Because growing up, I've always felt like my like Iboloys were like the more boring out of all the like compared to the Kalinga, the
No
tattoos and
heads,
stuff.
no
So I've always
pictures of
thought
heads.
exactly.
Yeah, but you
exactly.
dance
I've
a long
always-
time. Come on, what are you complaining about?
That's our most
Have more
hardcore thing.
endurance.
Sure,
You
but
can dance longer than
so
all of us.
Yeah, there were the Spanish, of course, they came for two reasons: to spread Christianity and to get a little wealth out of the
some gold.
Philippines.
Yeah.
And the wealth of the Cordillera was gold, and that gold was in Benguet. So that's really what they were after, was the gold. But the Igorots were very good. There's a priest who said, boy, you ask them about their gold mines and they will lie to you like crazy in order to protect them. So the Spaniards never found the gold mines. Never found the gold mines in Benguet, in Itogon, and Mankayan. But they tried to bring the religion. And were sort of able to bring it a little bit, but not very successfully. But they did get control of the province. For the most part, I think the northern area above Kabayan, the Bugias, they still had a difficult time there. But so that's why the Benguet people say they're boring because they okay. Now, as far as being Christianized, they sort of halfway, they'd accept Christianity, just to get along because the Spanish military was there in Trinidad. But people like Juan Carino, I think I'm guessing only. I'm thinking he knew how to read and write, and he knew Spanish. I'm guessing, but a lot of the other people there, they did not. If they needed to have a document written down or something, they went to the Illocanos who also lived there, and the Illocanos were the ones who did all the writing for them. So when my grandfather got there in 1896, he said, in Benguet, he said, hardly any Christians here. Aside from the Spaniards, of course, but hardly any Christians.
Interesting.
How far was the Spanish reach within the Cordilleras? Because my mom's from Cabayan, my dad's from Batan. I was born in the Trinidad. What was the strength of the Spanish, I guess, reach within that region? How far
I
did
think
they
their
go?
reach went up to Cabayan. I think north of Cabayan, perhaps not so much. I know that when the Philippines, see what happened was Benguet was under Filipino control for about a year and a half, from July of 1898 to December of 1900. And the Filipinos came up from Pangasinan. They followed the Nagilian Trail, and they kicked the Spanish out of Trinidad. So the Spanish couldn't go back down because that's where the Filipinos were coming up from. So they fled the other way to Bontoc. And the medical officer of the Spanish group in Trinidad wrote my grandfather and said, pray for me. I'm headed for Bontoc. My head may not be on my shoulders.
What happened to that group? Did they make it back, or did they?
Yeah, most of them made it. It was a military group, so they made it. They had guns and stuff. They made it to Bontoc.
Yeah.
They made it.
Fascinating.
But then the Filipinos took over Benguet briefly, and Juan Carino became the governor
And then
of
the
Benguet
Americans came.
for about a year. And then the Americans came and kicked them out. That's the end of it.
The Buffalo Soldiers, or the
The black soldiers, white officers.
Right.
Rudd, those people. Yeah. It was in that time that because what happened was Antonio Luna figured that the Filipinos could hold the Cordillera. They may not be able to hold the lowlands, but they could hold the Cordillera indefinitely. And he was hoping the Americans would then get sick and tired of trying to colonize the country if they couldn't hold the Cordillera. So his plan was to defend the Cordillera. But Aguinaldo had him killed before that could take place.
Wow,
Sorry,
that
so
sounds very Filipino to do. Sheesh.
Well, remember that he had Bonifacio killed first.
Oh, that's true.
That's
yeah.
right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Aguinaldo
That's right.
didn't want
Kill all
any-
your rivals.
That's right. He didn't want any
Yeah.
competition.
But I know he regretted it. I think what was it? Was it one of his grandsons or something like that? I think.
Oh, in the end, he became the American lackey, right?
Yeah, but according to the family members, he did regret his decisions on So like, according to like some of our teachers at San Francisco State who knew some of the ancestors of so like they said he did regret it. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. At that time,
Yeah.
who knows? It was a messy time. So when the Americans were pushing Aguinaldo further and further north, from Malolos to Cabanatuan to Dagupan, and then from there further north, what happened was the plan was still to go to the Cordillera and hang out there. But what happened was Aguinaldo thought that the Americans would easily negotiate the Nagilian Trail and catch him. So he went further north. But Paterno, who was the prime minister then, took the Nagilian Trail to Baguio. But by the time he got to Baguio, he was fine there, but he had no contact with the rest of the government. So no way. And Aguinaldo went further north to, was it Candon or something like that, and then crossed the Cordillera through there. And his crossing involved going through a mountain range in Ilocos called Mount Tilan. and the pass was Tirad Pass.
Oh, Pass. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so what happened was the the very famous fight there. Gregorio del Pilar and 60 men said, "Okay, we'll hold this pass so you can escape. We'll delay the Americans as much as possible." So that fight lasted one day. It took the Americans one day to kill Del Pilar and get through the pass. But the fascinating thing is there's a journal carried by David Barrows, who was the first chief of the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes. And he said that at some point in the pursuit of Aguinaldo in Talubin, in Montauk, the sergeant in charge of the prisoners that he had taken, the Filipino prisoners, sold them to the Bontoc, 22 of them. And the Bontoc immediately speared them and chopped off their heads.
Oh, wow.
For 100 pesos.
Yeah.
So, well, the point is that the Cordillera people, and even and my grandfather said this, even the Iboloy were not sympathetic to the revolution.
Yes.
Because those people from the lowlands came up to the mountains and treated them just as badly as the Spanish treated them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We were kind of talking about that actually.
So that kind of opened up also kind of like a little bit more, I mean, a little bit more openness to seeing Americans come in some ways. When you look at how they came into Baguio, and all of a sudden it's like the summer capital.
Yeah, well, the Buffalo Soldiers gave the people their candy. They took a smarter approach. In general, the Americans took a smarter approach. The Spanish approach is always confrontational. The big confrontational was over tobacco. The Spanish wanted a tobacco monopoly to make money, and the Cordillera people would not go along with it. They grew their tobacco and they sold it as contraband. And the Spanish kept trying to, they burned villages, to try to make them stop, but it kept going. But what the Americans did was when they came, they negotiated with all these tribal people. They realized that they were open to negotiation and open to presence.
Yeah, their influence with their interactions with the Indians, Indian tribes. Because there were also Texas Rangers that were sent up to the Cordilleras. Were they not? Were there not? I remember reading that somewhere, but I could be wrong.
Texas Rangers. That I don't know. I mean, they came from all over, the American soldiers. They were all volunteer army. But they're very possible Texas Rangers. Now, what happened after is when the American soldiers, when the Philippine-American War was over and the American soldiers found out that there was gold in Benguet, they started going there. They started drifting over there, trying to figure out where the gold is. A lot of them were cowboys. And that's where the cowboy culture came into Benguet. There were already essentially cowboys in Benguet. They were called the Pastol. The Pastol were the people who took charge of the cattle. Cattle was the main source of wealth for the Baknang of Benguet, the Carinos and those people. And the Pastol, they say, were the illegitimate children of the Baknang, whom they could not claim as their own, but didn't want them to be, poor camote farmers. So they made them cowboys. And then, so they were already cowboys. They rode horses, and then it's just a matter of the Americans coming in with their cowboy culture. And now there's a cowboy culture, at least in Baguio. There are cowboy bars, cowboy boots, country western songs, and stuff like that.
Oh, even the way the folks walk is like as if you had a horse. Kind of like the gait of people, the way they walk, it has that thing to it, and our love for country music. Oh my gosh.
That's from the Americans. And the Americans what a lot of those soldiers did was they married Igorot women so that they could lay claim to the gold, to the mines.
I see. All
but
tactic.
What Worcester did, he saw that was happening, and my grandfather did too early on. He saw the discharged American soldiers start drifting up, and he was worried that those American soldiers would set up their own country in Benguet and control the resources. So they created a government, Acts 48 and 49, the Philippine Commission created a government for Benguet so that they could control their American soldiers.
Oh, so that's what initiated it?
Yeah, that's what the speed was. They got it done in a month.
Oh wow.
Because they thought if they waited, the American soldiers would just establish, they'd marry Igorot women, establish themselves in there, and start mining the gold.
So it was really kind of cowboy in the sense that it was just so like anybody could run the show at any moment.
Yeah, there was
And so
the Americans had controlled Benguet, so
Yeah. So it's kind of like the way California became a state once they found that gold there, and within less than a year, all of a sudden there's a U.S. government here.
that's right. The Mexicans were out.
Yeah.
That's right. Well,
Californians.
I mean, they learn from their history. They know their history, and they do their research.
Yeah, who knows, man? Some of those American soldiers may have been the descendants of the 49ers that came to
That's
San
very
Francisco
interesting.
Gold Rush. Yeah,
Wow.
they knew what they were doing. So but there's very little of that American left. I think the American colonial government controlled those soldiers pretty well. It's not like there are a whole bunch of mestizos with American names running around Benguet. Some maybe, but not a lot.
I joke and say Oaks, but you know.
Oaks.
But I think he came later. That's for you, Father, if you're watching.
Father Huaques. And Huaques is the belt that the Ifugao, the Bontoc women used to secure their tapis or their skirt.
Oaxacas.
Is a Huaques.
That's
It's
the
a belt.
Bontoc.
It's a woven belt. You put on a skirt, right?
Yeah.
Bontoc woman. And then to hold the skirt in place, you have a woven belt.
Right.
The belt is called the Huaques.
That's amazing.
The things you learn.
Yeah, I know.
Actually.
That is
I think
good
the other word is
knowledge.
like bakut or something like that, right? It's the other
Which one?
another word for the belt as well.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I only know the Huaques part. I'm loaded with trivia.
Well, one of the things we talk about is like sometimes for us lay folks, like to learn, you have to really actually hear from many sources, and especially when you talk to the older folks, you can't just like get the information from just one person. You have to like just keep on talking to people and find out what they know, what they understand, and then like it's almost like for your own understanding, you have to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together.
That's right. That's right.
But this
this is oral history. It's been handed down for centuries, so it's gotten diluted a little bit over time. Very hard to do oral history. The languages in the Cordillera, those people had no writing. There was no written form. So you can't find an original documented something about anything about the Cordillera.
Right.
Oh, that's right. And that's why when William Henry Scott does his research, it's all based on like Spanish papers and documents. Right. And that's where he gets a little bit of criticism from some of the scholars because, well, where else are you going to get your source?
Yeah, that's right. That's all there was.
Yeah.
That's all there was. The Spanish.
He's speaking of Henry Scott, like he's one of the guys who mentioned the early writings of the Spaniards when they were talking about the Pangasinan people, that they danced very similarly to the Benguet folks, and which completely makes sense. But of course the Spaniards changed their culture, but they were pretty much according. They were just like the rest of us, especially particularly the Iboloi. And so it's really interesting hearing about that because we like Pangalatok sounds a lot like Ibolo, right? So it's really interesting. I mean, maybe a lot of folks out there might be surprised that their ancestors used to dance the same way, used to look the same way,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is whether it was the Ibaloy going down the Agno River to Pangasinan or the Pangasinan people going up the Agno River to Benguet. That's right. People argue about that still.
Which way? What came first, the chicken or the egg, kind of thing?
Yeah. So when people complain about so many Pangasinan people moving to Baguio, Those are your cousins.
Yes, exactly.
They're just going back home.
Distant cousins.
It's
That's
the call
right.
of the ancestors, you know? It's the call of the ancestors.
Oh,
Right.
man.
Yeah, they're just going back home. They're going back to their rightful territory.
Yeah, their origins, right?
Yeah.
They're returning to their origins.
So, in terms of the concept of ili, can you just talk a little bit about the transformation from ili to the tribes and the tribal names? And
Yeah, so so there was no concept of tribe. There was no such thing as an Ipugao tribe with a tribal leader. None of that. It was all village. It was all ili. And now, at the same time, though, people like Blumentritt had been long distance. He never set foot in the Philippines, but he had been studying the languages. And so he developed this ethno-linguistic groups. He said, well, this group of people speak kind of the same language, so you can group them together. So that's how he did it. And then when Worcester came along, he knew about Blumentritt. He didn't like what Blumentritt did, but he realized that, yes, there's some similarities between certain groups of people. So all I have to do is just draw lines on a map and call the people who live in this part Ifugao. And that's it. So that's what he did. He drew lines on the map and he made provinces. And he said, okay, basically you people are this. You belong to this tribe. Although Worcester himself admitted there were very few tribes in the Philippines and no real tribes in the Cordillera. I mean, in the
So
sense of
when did that concept of tribe amongst Cordillerans come together? Then is that something
American
that
times.
American times?
American times. Yeah. American times. The Spanish didn't bother. They had provinces though. They had provinces. Ifugao was called Kiangan in Spanish
So then
times. The Americans changed the name.
Oh, it used to be called Kiangan.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
And then the boundaries change. Those Ilonggot people over there and stuff like that.
So folks back then, they would just say like Taga Basao. You know, I'm like they would just
that's
say
right.
their
It's the Ili.
versus like, oh yeah, I'm from the mountain province. So just say like their village name and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they'd say that's my Ili or my. So that's really an Illocano word, huh?
It's an Illocano word. Canao is an Illocano word. It means superstition.
Oh, wow.
Originally, if you go back to the 1760 something dictionary, the Illocano Spanish dictionary by Padre Caro, he lists Canao is there and it says superstition, but in Spanish. Including a fascinating example that if a certain creature crosses your path as you're on your way to fight your enemies, that's a bad omen and you have to turn back. And that same superstition is in Formosa. The Taiwanese Aboriginals have the same superstition.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, the tattoos are very similar in some ways too. And,
tattoos, right. And the tattoos had a purpose. They marked you as being a good headhunter if you're a man and a good weaver if you're a woman.
Oh,
so
wow.
male and female had tattoos.
One of the older women I met in Bontoc in the late 80s, early 90s, she was talking about how like the power of the tattoos on the arms made a female also more fertile. So they're having problem with children, you know, they would say, okay, go get the tattoos. And then you know, like, and that it makes sense because you know when you're dancing too, like you're dancing and your arms are up, you show how that's like that was such a big deal for the people. I mean, this even to this day, I mean, people pay so much money for an IVF and the IUI, you know, and it's just seen in a different way. But like for like part of the blessings is to have lots of children and show how fertile you are. And so like, you know, if you show off those tattoos, and that's why that's another reason I think our ancestors kind of connected not only with the beauty and power of the eagle, but it was also a way to show off those tattoos on the arms.
But don't you think that also would open up the fertility points too, with that much that many points being pricked in there too?
Well,
I mean,
there's a lot.
There's
some on the inside of the leg, some on the belly and stuff like that. But I don't know about the old patterns that I've seen are mainly on the
like
the arms and forearms. But I think the old Iboloy tattoos, the ones that in
Apuano.
Yeah, in her book, like they had the tattoos up and down the body, the legs too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean
Yeah,
that
Apuano.
does
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
that would
He,
make sense.
he had them
That would
all
make
up and
sense.
down. So, and
Yeah.
I think that even the females had them then too, as well,
Right.
up and
Right.
down. But then at some point, I don't know what it is. It's just what maybe it's either influence from outside or what is deemed practical. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's how over time the culture changed, and maybe they decided to have less tattoos and just focus on the upper body. And the folks in Taiwan, they had the face tattoos, but then we don't have many of the face tattoos in our culture. So I don't know what happened, uh, or when it.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I guess it lost. It's maybe when the Spanish took over and they convinced people that heaven is up in the sky rather than in Mount Pulag, and you don't need tattoos to enter.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
became
yeah.
less popular. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Well, man, that's a total possibility. Like,
That makes sense.
yeah, I mean, our great grandmother had the tattoos all over, but like, it's a real shame. She and all the pictures we have of her, she's wearing a jacket because
so you can't see them.
yeah, you can't
Yeah.
see him because like
Yeah.
every time
Gotta hide it.
she would go down the mountain, like all the Illocano people would start pointing at her and they'd start like kind of ridiculing her. So she would
Mhm.
always try and cover the tattoos up so they wouldn't know, uh, you know, that she was Igorot. So
That's coming back in fashion, right?
now it
There's
is.
supposed to be famous tattoo artists in Sagada
sure.
that everybody goes to get their tattoo.
And
Yeah.
Kalinga, and like everybody's into it. Like everybody's like all about the tattoos, and even like they're mixing Polynesian tattoos and
Yeah, right here.
bird style tattoos and stuff like that. So it's
Mm.
it is that's just there's a newfound pride in it, and that's definitely a whole nother discussion. And hopefully we can get Annalyn.
Annalyn, yeah,
If you're
Annalyn,
watching
you have
this,
to get her to come.
Yeah.
That's right. You're
yeah,
watching.
definitely
That would be amazing.
that
Come
would
and
be
talk.
amazing. Yeah.
Speaking of fertility,
Hmm.
there's an interesting story. The Juan Carino, who was the governor of Benguet at one point, um, initially married a woman from Kabayan called
Ah.
Melja. They had no children. And in those
Oh.
times, if you had no children, you could divorce. So he
Yes, that's
divorced
right.
her, and he moved to Bly, I guess, and found another wife and had some children with her. Now, when the Americans came, they started hunting down Juan Carino. So to hide, he went to Kabayan to hide. And the story is that the people of Kabayan were so mad at him for divorcing Melja, they
Yeah.
squealed.
Oh, they squid. Okay, so they caught him in Kabayan then.
Yeah, well, no, they shot him in Kabayan.
They
He
shot him in
escaped
Kabayan.
south to Elep, and they caught him in Elep.
Oh wow,
He and
what a
Parino,
story.
he and Pedro Parino together escaped. There's a cave in Ambongdolan, which is sometimes known as the Patilno Cave, where supposedly Carino and Paterno hid out on their way from Tublay to Kabayan. I saw that cave. Boy, the entrance is very small.
Oh wow. Wow.
Yeah, you can access that cave, but they don't suggest you entering it unless you know what you're doing.
Oh geez.
Yeah, go with the tour guide.
Go with your guide,
Go
bring your
with the
hiking
tour
boots
Yeah.
and your ropes and your cell phone just in case.
Yeah, if that works.
Wow.
In case you get stuck in the cave. Yeah. So those are the little trivial stories.
No, that's
Make
amazing.
things fun. Make things fun to read up on.
Yeah, amongst the Kankanai people, that was also something as well. You could divorce your wife if you weren't
Yeah, if you
able
had
to
no
have
children.
children.
Yeah.
But then the funny thing is, it could have been the man's issue.
It could have been a matter. Well, we'll find out if he marries enough women and none of them have children.
Nothing happens. Yeah.
Maybe it's him.
Yeah.
So Juan Carino's younger brother is Mateo Carino. And Mateo Carino's great skill was cattle. He was a good cowboy. And so when Juan and Mateo Carino's father, Pablo Carino, realized that Dangvis, the person who owned Baguio essentially, had only one child, Bayosa. Right? So they arranged a marriage between Mateo, because Juan Carino was the older one, so he was going to inherit Tublay. But
Okay.
so Mateo Carino was sent to marry Bayosa. And that's how the Carinos came to Baguio. And they say that all Mateo Carino knew how to do was take care of cattle. He was there to take care of cattle. The smarts, the management of the place was with Bayosa, the wife. She was the real brains behind the operation over there.
That's well, at least
It was her line, owned Baguio, her line, up Dangvis, Apulog Minse, all the way up to Amkidit. That was there.
Very interesting.
That was their place.
Wow. So like that's how the power runs. You marry into
I forget the English technical term for it, but there was a tradition where the men would move in to the woman's family. Something like that. I forget the name. So that's what happened with Mateo Carino. He moved in with his wife's family.
Oh wow,
very interesting.
Yeah,
I think someone shared a story similar. There's just like a folk story about like how like how engagement starts between the two couples and stuff like that. And a lot of the times it seems like it's the man who goes over to the woman's side.
Yeah,
I'm in London, right? So.
That's following the tradition.
Yeah, you
I
didn't
mean,
stray
it's
that
funny
far.
They told me
huh?
that story during my engagement party, and they're talking about the tradition of how like the mom has to come over and they talk to the parents and stuff like that, and that happened here in London, and I didn't think that like how many years later I'd end up over here, so just kind of a.
So, Dr. Shearer, what exactly was your profession, and what was the doctorate from? If you could explain to our folks.
Yeah. So I graduated from the UP College of Medicine, and I was a pediatrician.
Wow.
Wow.
That's about as exciting as it gets.
Oh, that's pretty awesome, though.
Room, though.
But the diversity of study that I think that's I think people who dedicate themselves to always being a student and wanting to learn, I think they're always more closer to the truth than somebody else, so having that kind of diversity in terms of what you want to study and what you want to keep on learning, and I really commend you with that. And it's like I said, it's great to have you here today, and you're always welcome to come by when we do more of these.
Okay.
If you don't mind chopping it up with us, we're very casual here.
I'm happy to. That's fine. I'm happy to come by. But as I said, there are people out there who know a lot more than I do, and some of them are probably already complaining about what I said today. But that's
Filipinos.
That's the nature of the beast.
Yeah,
we triangulate people.
I think once this is released, there might be quite a bit more questions anyway, so it'd be nice to have you back and maybe clarify a few things that maybe we haven't thought of or anything like that. So yeah, it'd be great to have you back for sure.
Complained about. That's very possible.
Well, that's great though.
That's the thing here. Our goal is just to have a discussion, create a discussion. If we're saying things that are incorrect, please correct us. I mean, we're just talking. That's it. We just want other people to start thinking about this culture and talk about it. And if we can somehow find all the correct information, get them available out there for everybody, I mean, that'd be amazing. So that's all we're trying to do here.
Well, it's good. So I guess the main idea is that your tribes are an American invention. So you can go ahead and identify yourself as Kalinga, but it's geographic and linguistic, maybe.
Well, God bless America then, in some ways. Which is really fascinating, because then what we're discovering also through doing these podcasts is that there are a whole bunch of different like Igorot people all over the world who are trying to discover that just one sense of being Igorot. They might find that they might have like a little percentage of Igorot blood of somehow, somewhere that they found out either through family stories, but they don't know too much about it.
Right.
And so I think what's fascinating is that even though it's a construct in some ways, and that the identity goes much more deeper into a certain locality, that broader construct really means something to somebody. And that in fact they sometimes hold on to it because it seems like it's the most successful or the strongest part of their own ethnic identity, even though it's like a little percentage. They hold on to it because it is the one that demonstrated some sort of resistance against maybe the colonial power, or it demonstrated some sort of like strength because of like the legacy of Igorot people, and it's kind of like its fierceness. And so that's a really interesting thing to know that, okay, so what we hold on to is also a bit of a construct,
Yeah.
but it's also our truth now, right? So that's the paradox of it.
Yeah.
But there are good books you can read, and the starting point is really Scott's discovery of the Igorots.
Mm.
So if you have some Igorot blood and you want to know what it means to be an Igorot, that's the book to start with, and then you expand from there.
Yes, yes. Henry Scott's material is definitely where I started. And I am not a linguist or an archaeologist or an anthropologist, but he had a lot of good material. And my mom was actually was a student under him. When she went to in Sagada. In Sagada.
Oh, in Sagada.
Yeah, St. Mary's. And so she said she would mention him, and I'm like, oh wow, so you studied under him. Yeah, but I don't think it was she wasn't an anther, she was a nurse, but she remembers him. And so like my brother and I, especially
Scott
during the times when it was
English
hard to get
teacher.
those books. Oh,
There's
English
your
teacher.
book, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And you can find Discovery of the Igorots every once in a while on Amazon. Sometimes someone's selling a used copy. This one I got on Amazon, and it's actually completely wrapped up. And so what I found is I've given it to people who are interested. Or you could go to the Philippines, and it's 333 peso.
No, that's not a bad. That's not a bad.
It's not bad at all.
Not bad, right?
Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can find
some
it.
of the others are so expensive.
Yes.
No, that's a great book. Scott really, he wrote well. He wrote correctly.
His
he-
research in
he
the
did it.
Spanish archives is wow. I mean, he had
Yeah,
to go
if you
deep.
speak Spanish, that's the problem with the
Yeah.
Spanish archives.
Mm.
He did, because he spoke Spanish, obviously, because he based his things on the archives.
A lot
Yeah,
of
there's a
it.
nice little part of his book there where he says where he lists all the archives that he got that information from.
Mm.
So that's nice.
Maybe I think we were talking last time about maybe like talking about the word Igorot,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
maybe
Yeah.
we can have you come back.
Oh yes,
Okay.
because we did want to kind of like update because I
Yeah.
remember about 20 years ago, or maybe even longer now, there was a huge debate about like how people from the region should identify Cordilleran, Igorot, and that was actually the topic of the first international Igorot consultation.
Yeah, 1995.
And back in what year was
95.
that? 95.
1995. Yeah.
And that was a huge kind of thing. Generally, what we found was that the people in the Philippines wanted to be called Cordilleran, and the people in outside in the diaspora wanted to identify as Igorot.
Mostly people from Mountain Province and Benguet, but of course, like
Yes.
more like the Kalingas and the Ifugas wanted to call
They wanted to be
themselves-
their Kalingas and Ifugals.
That's right. They would not self-identify as Igorot, the Kalinga and the Apayao, those people.
Mhm.
Because the name came from the Spanish when from Pangasinan and what's La Union now wasn't there then, the Ilocos, they encountered the mountain people, they encountered them from that side. And so they applied the term Igorot to the people on that side of the Cordillera, the western side of the Cordillera.
Mm. I'm really glad you kind of covered that a little bit, like it's kind of funny, like we usually don't name ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. They say Bontok or Ifuntok, they say that is not an exonym, but I haven't really Well, if you can get Junpil Brett one day to come over here, she's the best person to talk about that.
Mm.
They say that's actually the name they actually gave themselves, not the name that some other people gave them.
Which kind of makes sense. if you if you know Bontoc people, like it's like, yeah, we're gonna name ourselves. We're not
That's
gonna
right.
wait for somebody
That's
else.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
very interesting.
And then, of course, after Scott, then Scott wrote about Igorot. He wrote some little essays on the word.
Yeah, he had a
Igorot.
good
So,
one. He had a really good
yeah.
one.
You can look
Yeah.
those up. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's quite possible that those Kalinga and Apayao people will never admit to being Igorots. So you'll just have to find a term that everybody is happy with.
Cordillera.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that was the
Except,
Cordilleran.
and what about those old Illocanos who live in Baguio? Will you consider them Cordillera? You can't consider them indigenous or Tagalogs. Whoever is non-indigenous but lives in the Cordillera.
Oh, you mean the Koreans who live there now?
The Cordillera, you go.
Oh my
the
gosh,
Korean.
yeah, they could be considered Cordilleran now.
Yeah.
They're the Cordillerans.
Korea.
Yeah,
Actually,
so-
last time I was up there, there were so many who lived there. They came in 2 buses to your mother and father-in-law's resort up in Asin.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
They were definitely, and they were local.
Because there's a museum up the mountain too. So like what they'll usually do is they'll go to the museum, and then for rest they'll book, and then they'll come down to the to the baths and stuff and chill and have some fun. And when they're done evening, they take the buses back all the way up. This is down in Asin. So my
yeah.
my
The
in-laws have a
springs.
place
Is,
there.
is the road there good now? I wanted to go once upon a time, but they said the road wasn't good.
It's much better now.
Oh,
I'm
it's
not
good.
saying it's perfect.
Much better. Definitely
It's
much better.
now.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, the road up to like Basao Sagara Bontoc, my God,
Uh-huh.
compared to like the 90s, it's like night and
Oh.
day. Like,
Yeah, no
it
more
couldn't-
river crossing. They actually built a bridge.
Well,
Yeah.
how fast they can get up there, it's crazy. Like they can get up there so fast. When I just remember when we would go there, it's just like like you're, especially after the earthquake in the 90s, they just totally demolished most of the roads. So now the roads going all the way up there just much smoother.
I mean,
It's kinda
even-
The question
scary
is,
going.
you think Sagada is better now than it was in the days when you had to take the bumpy bus and cross the river? Or
Oh,
is it turning into Baguio?
question.
I can't answer. Like
Baguio,
my wife's uncle's the mayor there, so I can't. No, but is it better? I'll tell you that my wife's uncle is holding down the fort pretty well. There's been some,
Yes.
like you might have read about it, where these folks from the news wanted to come up over there and during this time during COVID, and
Uh-huh.
he said nope. And I
Oh.
think they were trying to do like film a bunch of things so that they can create I guess something for Duterte, like to speak about all the areas in the Philippines and stuff. And so, but he rejected them because he told them, like, we're under lockdown, and
Yeah, that's
we
right.
can't expose
that's
our
good.
people that way. So
That's smart.
there's
Oh, yeah.
definitely a ton of tourists there, and it's changed the scene a lot. So
But with the lockdown, any problems that created by the ton of tourists, they can sort of fix now, or work on while the tourists aren't there.
yeah,
Garbage, water, whatever
yeah. Well,
issues
Well,
they have.
well, there's definitely a stream of income that probably wasn't there as much as before.
Well,
Yeah,
one
it's
of the
hard to
things that
say.
they were talking about that was in their news up there in Sagada was just to limit the number of tourists, like literally limit the number
Yeah,
of
yeah.
buses that can come up.
Because the
Yeah.
buses were like, taking up all this, the passage through and stuff, and people who live and work there, they're all distracted by like the buses and the tourists that are there. So it's like this thing where it's like, yeah, it's bringing in money, but at the same time, it's kind of disrupts a lot of the normal life there. So it has a positive and negative to it, I guess.
Also, the kind of pollution that comes up there too. I mean, I remember Sagada being, you smell the air. Baguio used to be this. You could breathe the air, and it wow, you could smell the pines. No, you don't see the pines.
Well,
and
it's definitely has Baguio's changed a lot. So
yeah.
It's so much
Sagada,
warmer.
I haven't been there, but in a long time. But you can imagine that maybe they don't want to go that route.
I want to keep the air clean and stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just an issue of managing it. It's just
Mhm.
and now that the roads are are much better, there have been more people going up, and I think that I know Wendy's uncle's been having to deal with that, so I know he's trying to manage it as much as possible. Yeah.
When the tourists go up there, are they interested in the culture? Is there a way for them to learn about the culture? Or are they just there for the scenery?
The pictures.
Yeah. Well, there's there's a
The
whole art scene
headhunters?
there now. So a lot of people are going there
Okay.
because of
Okay.
they're
wow.
artists and they know
Uh-huh.
other artists who live out
Right.
there, and so that's kind of changed things. And there's like I think most of the tourists who go up there are pretty sincere about wanting to learn the culture, but for a lot of them who come up, it's more about like them feeling like their connection to
To
their
nature.
indigenous self, whether or
Okay.
not they have Igorot blood or not, right? Because
Yeah,
it's kind
Robert
of
Padilla.
yeah. It's kind of like that whole pan Filipino thing, and so like a lot of people going up there, I think that's what they're trying to connect to, and then maybe possibly think that, oh, maybe my ancestors were like this, and trying to connect that way. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who come up there who cause a little bit of trouble, but I think for the most part, most of them are kind of sincere.
Okay. Well, I just hope that Sagada doesn't become Baguio.
Mm.
Yeah, I know it's kind of
Yeah.
it's like you'd think that would never happen, but anything is possible. But like I said, I know that he's definitely trying to manage the tourism, so they're like limiting how many buses can come into a certain area and park, this kind of thing. And so
Are there lowlanders who go there to live, to settle down, and live there?
some artists have some
Some
artists have,
artists,
yeah.
but not generally speaking. People don't move to
Not that I
Sagada from Manila, so to speak. Tagalogs don't move to Sagada from Manila.
yeah, not really.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah, when they discover, hey, the weather here is nice.
and
And
there's no coronavirus.
oh,
Yeah, there's no coronavirus, and if the internet gets really good over there, then maybe they'll start moving there. Wi-Fi in the Philippines is just bad, just in general.
Yeah.
Well, it's mountains.
Yeah, it's the mountains. You'd think it was so high that the antennas would really work well there, but I don't know. That's the internet for you.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who's the guy? Elon Musk is trying to solve that for the world, for like third world countries. He's trying to create like a super Wi-Fi network. That's why he's sending up
Right,
all
with-
those rockets there.
With satellites. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tons of satellites.
He'll figure something out.
Yeah, we'll see. Ken, you've been very quiet. For the people on the show, this is Kenneth. He is normally watching the live stream, but since he couldn't be we're not really doing a live stream today, so we invited him to come on in. He's been listening very intently. Do you have any questions for Dr. Shearer or anything you want to comment on?
No, it's just been very educational, and this is all kind of new to me, so it's very just great to hear, and I'm always interested in listening and learning, and you guys already kind of asked the questions that I was kind of curious about, but maybe how about the Igorot language, and in respect to maybe the Illocano language, how that kind of, maybe that was my question, kind of how that kind of mixed together and kind of created that I don't know, mix.
Yeah.
With
The languages are not
Yeah.
closely related, but
Okay.
what happened was the Illocanos moved into the Cordillera because they could read and write. That's one of the reasons, or for whatever reason they wanted to farm or run a store or something like that. But the reason why they came in was because they could read and write. They had a written language which the Cordilleran people didn't have. So if there's any documentation that needed to be done, you called your local Illocano to write it out. So that was their contribution. Different from the Pangasinan people who were like cousins.
Oh yeah, to the in the Formosa area as well, or
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, they all came from there. The question is whether a separate group landed in the Ilocos versus the group that landed in Cagayan and followed the rivers. Yeah. But if you look at the language from the linguist, the Illocano is a very far relation. It's not the Cordilleran language. It's a far relation to the Cordilleran languages. But
Wow.
but the language, the Illocano language, crept into like all languages. They'll borrow from whoever comes around. Like I said, Canao is a Illocano word, Ili is an Illocano word, and stuff like that. So that's all borrowed. So my grandfather wrote. He said that there must have been at one time a pure form of Nabaloy, but you can't get at it anymore because of the influence of the Illocanos. There's so much Illocano in Nabaloy, in Ibaloy, that you can't. It's hard to tweeze out a pure Nabaloy from the way the people spoke that, and that was 1900s. That was 100 plus years ago. He already couldn't squeeze out a pure Nabaloy from what the people then were speaking, which was already loaded with Illocano words.
So the I don't know the term, but ancient Illocanos, they're saying they also came from Formosa,
Yes.
from Taiwan, but
Yeah.
they probably entered through another, maybe from the
It's
west.
possible that they landed in the West Coast, yeah, rather than landing in the Cagayan Valley, that they landed separately in the West Coast and started off there. That's possible. That has to be worked out.
But they didn't really have to climb mountains out there then. It was easy
Yeah,
to
that's
spread
right.
out through that area. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
but then the written language also. How did that kind of some people
Well,
kept it.
they because the Spaniards came, took over that place very early in the late 16th century. So those people there learned how to write Spanish because that was there.
Oh, you're talking about Romanized words. I thought you were talking about Babayin, like
I don't
Kalibata
think
and
the
stuff like that.
Baybayin went all the way up that far. I don't know. It may be, but I don't know.
Oh, okay. So when you were talking about the written language, you're talking about Romanized, yes, versus
Yes,
like
that's
the
right.
native writing.
They were scribes, I guess is the word for it. Their
Mm.
job was to produce documents, and it was. Yeah.
So did the native writing mainly come from the south and move on up, you think?
That is the idea. There are some people who think it was originally Sanskrit. It was the Hindus from India who moved to Indonesia and Malaya, and from there they took their Sanskrit language up north, and that the Baybayin is an offshoot of Sanskrit writing.
Right.
The thinking.
Yeah, because I remember a long time ago in the 90s, like I had a friend he's not Igorot, but he was trying to find out like if people in the mountain, like in the Cordillera, had the writing. He couldn't find it anywhere, and in some ways I was kind of disappointed. It's like, oh man, we don't have our but at the same time, it is what it is. It just means that it just made me think more. Why would the lowlanders have it, but they didn't have it up there? And so that means that there was some type of different immigration or something, And
or just bigger societies. The societies there were bigger, and so they needed writing to be organized. Whereas in the Cordillera, it was village.
Mm-hmm.
So it was necessity.
Village. Yeah. was a necessity as the societies got bigger.
Right.
to
Right.
be
Because
able
writing
to
would be
write.
good for like making contracts or whatever or
Yeah,
promises.
or
Yeah.
just counting stuff. I sold you
Yeah.
10 cows. You need to give me
Yeah.
20
So-
goats,
proof.
something like that. Write it down.
So, Dr. Shearer, what in your research, what was the significance then of the head hunting? Because I mean, we saw a lot of heads in some of your slides there.
Oh, it's ritual. It was part of the ritual. You needed a head for your Canao, for your festival. Yeah, that was part of it. The other part was it was warfare as well.
Mm.
Yeah, there's the physician that accompanied. So Aguinaldo crossed the Cordillera from west to east, and he was accompanied by a doctor named Simeon Villa. And Simeon Villa kept a diary. And if you can get a hold of Simeon Villa's diary,
Simeon
then
Villa.
he talks also about the Igorots, and they were deathly afraid of the Igorots. Or well, I guess they weren't Igorots. They went to Bontoc. Yeah, that's true. So Igorots, because they'd have native guides, and they'd send the native guides out to scout ahead, and they'd never come back. And then you look for them, and you find their bodies cut up, the heart taken out, and stuff like that. And then the story was, well, they took the heart and they drank the blood from the heart, stuff like that. Some sort of cannibalism of some form in those things. Now, this is Villa talking, so you don't know, the veracity of that, but that's but you get that eye-opening stuff from there. But definitely, he wrote the Filipino troops were scared of the.
Yeah,
Wow.
the headhunting, which was very, very interesting to kind of like hear about the reasons why I mean, I think it's similar, although I don't hear much about the Rainbow Bridge amongst our people. That that's what the indigenous Taiwanese have, that connection to their ancestors. They think about the Rainbow Bridge.
Yeah.
And the cutting of heads. I mean, although I do hear in the old stories, that's the reason why. It's like, because like if someone kills someone in your family, your ancestors are going to be pissed.
Yeah,
So
you had to get revenge.
You
had
have
Yeah.
to, yeah. So
You
it
have
was
to
just
take
like,
it out.
you have to, chop 10 heads in that person's village to kind of appease your ancestors' spirits.
Yeah,
But I don't know. Somewhere along the line, the spirituality or like their reasons must have changed over time as they started to settle further and further down the river. But even the Kalingas I don't hear them talking about the Rainbow Bridge either. And unless you've heard.
No. Did you watch that movie, Warriors of the Rainbow?
Yeah, I watched that, and like, that was so like, wow. When the first thing that hit me was
familiar.
like, the first thing that hit me was the singing. Like there was a scene where he's
Yeah.
singing and they're doing a call and response. I'm like, oh my god, that's just like, that's exactly like us. And then I started to see everything else, and I was like, oh wow, the tattoos and then the dancing, and then kind of like the way that they, their society was, even though it's a movie, they tried to keep things very close as much as possible.
It looked like they're trying to be as authentic as they could.
Yeah.
My grandfather was there. In fact, if you looked at that photo of the people whose heads got taken, he probably met some of them, because he was there 3 months before. 6 months before the massacre, he was in that village studying the language of those people.
My God.
Wow.
That's very interesting.
So he wrote about it briefly when he published his paper on that.
And he was trying to build connections between that language and the
Formosa and Philippine languages.
Very interesting.
Wow.
What year was that?
1930. No, wait, hang on. Let me thought. Yes, 1930. His paper came out 2 years later, 1932. Yeah.
Oh, so
But
1930.
unfortunately, it's all mountains, and he had an accident, and so he was not able to complete his trip. If he had completed his trip, which was north to south, he would have found the people that they now think were the ancestors of the Filipinos. I was in Taiwan in my hotel room at night. I turned on the TV, but I wasn't really paying attention. It was the news. And all of a sudden, I heard something. I said, "Oh, somebody's speaking Tagalog." But it was actually a regional broadcast from that group, the Amis people. And they were speaking their language. And I said, "Whoa, boy, that sounds close."
A lot of their
Wow.
language, they
Some
use a
people
lot
think
of that.
Amis.
They use the fa cha sound. They like that. They use fa and cha, like the Bontoc people.
Like the Bontoc people.
Yeah. So I don't know, like when I think about the Bontoc people, like maybe that's something that's left over from the original language.
Well, Ibaloy also uses cha.
Cha, yeah.
Yeah, the ancestors of the Baguio Ibaloy was a woman named Chamja.
Ah,
Chamja married Amkidit.
cha.
And
Yeah.
maybe this is a kind of like a for another time, but I am curious now about like how different Ilis intermarried, because of course there's a lot of like intermarrying between like third and fourth cousins in our area. That does exist, but and maybe because people just didn't go further out, and you just got that whole spread eventually. But how much of there was intermarrying between different areas?
I guess as peace descended on the two villages, as they declared peace with each other, then maybe, although there was some kidnapping also going on there. The story is
Yeah.
that in the old days, the rice terraces were planted by the women because the men had to stand guard in case the next village needed a head and thought that their women were easy pickings. So the women planted the rice while the men stood around with their weapons, I guess, standing guard. That's Ifugao. And Worcester claimed that when he eliminated headhunting, now the men had to plant the terraces. The men may not have been so happy about that. Claimed that was one of his accomplishments.
Oh gosh,
The
we'll
men
see.
to
He
plant
might
the
have been
terraces.
stretching the story a little bit too much. Too.
Yeah, possible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. I would love to ask like old folks and see what their thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
But my brother is married to him. Well,
Oh yeah, so you ask him who plants the terraces now, the men or the women?
Oh,
They both do
but her
now,
grandmother,
right?
they both do
grandmother
now,
died.
but I think definitely in the images that I used to see before, it was the women.
It's the women,
Yeah,
that's right.
the
Yeah,
women.
yeah, in the older
story was 'cause,
images.
yeah, the men had to stand guard against
Yeah,
the neighboring villagers who wanted heads. So that's Worcester's story anyway.
How do Worcester's borders hold up now? Are they completely different, or from the province borders, or are they?
Well, Amuraya no longer exists,
Right.
and Bontoc got swallowed up into something called the Mountain Province, and I think part of Lepanto also got swallowed up into there. There's no Lepanto anymore. Payao is still there. And we had the discussion a couple of weeks ago. Is Abra part? Should Abra
Oh yeah,
be part of the thing? Right.
that was during the Be Back of Northern California campfire, right?
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
what was that?
I didn't mention it at that time, but like we found out that our ancestor on our mom's side, well, he was originally the Mexican. He was a Mexican soldier that came over, and then he was probably like when we did our DNA, we found out he was Native American, and from the West
Yeah,
Coast.
sure, of course. Yeah.
And then during the Acapulco,
Spanish.
right during the Acapulco, the
It's actually
galleon.
from New Mexico.
Yeah, from New Mexico, and
So-
he ended up going to Abra, married a Tengian woman, and then from there, they ended up having a child who moved to Masla in Tajan, and so it's in some ways we could have said, well, we're Tengian. But like that we found out like our ancestors like it's way back was married a Tengian lady.
Yeah.
So
Worcester divided the Tingian into the wild Tingian and the tame Tingian. And the tame Tingian were the Abra Tingian, and the wild Tingian were the Apayao.
Oh, okay, I see.
That's how he divided the two. He called them both Apayao, but one group was the wild ones and the other was
Wild.
the tame ones.
Well, which is really funny because there's Upper Abra, right? And their culture is more closer to the folks in Apayao and Kalinga and so
Yeah.
but then there was a lot of back and forth movement apparently through Apayao as well, right? So it's kind of hard unless you know your ancestors' stories in terms of like how they got there, which way they moved. You know,
Right.
sometimes folks don't know. Like in Apayao, there's a whole community of mountain province people who moved there in I think in the 70s. That's your relatives, right, Gerald?
Yeah.
Were they
Yeah.
originally from mountain province and moved into Apayao, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was a whole bunch of them that moved over there, and you know, all their children consider themselves. Well, they know that their ancestry is from mountain province, but they consider themselves Apayao. You know.
Yeah, they consider themselves as a payo, but I mean they're not Isnig or anything. So
Yeah, they're not Isnik or Tenggin.
They don't speak. It's like
Kanganai.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah. The remember that for a very long time, Blumentrit's idea of south to north peopling of the Philippines held. And even in my grandfather's time, that was still the thought, south to north. But Bayer went to
Bayer.
Apayao and interviewed those people. And he reported that the Apayao told him that their ancestors came from the north, from Batanes.
From those islands.
Yeah, from those islands, which at that time was completely antithetical to the way people thought the Philippines was people. But the Apayaos had a tradition that their ancestors came from the north.
Is there any like in terms of like their in terms of their cultural dances in that area, or the way that they dress? Was there any?
Well, it's very funny. The Batanes do not resemble either the Formosan or the Cordilleran cultures. They have no terraces. They don't weave that cloth. Nothing. So some of the linguists think that Batanes was actually a dead end for one group of migrants from Taiwan. They went to Batanes and that's as far as they got. And then it's another group that ended up in northern Luzon from Taiwan. That's the thinking because the linguists can't connect, can't make a migration path from Taiwan to Batanes to Luzon. The language is just different.
I guess it could be possible too that they just didn't know the common name of Formosa, you know, and just called it Batanes, you know, but they really meant Formosa. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, Batanes. There was back migration from the Batanes to a tiny island in the southern tip of Taiwan. In English, it's called Orchid Island. The Chinese call it Lanyu. That is a Philippine language. The people who live in that island speak a Philippine language.
Okay.
Yeah, my grandfather got fooled into thinking that that was the link. That was the missing link, he called it, between Formosa and the Philippines, was the people on that island. But it turns out the linguists have figured out that it's really just back migration. The people from Batanes moved back up north and occupied that island.
I know. I guess there was a lot of back migration, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That kind of clouds the picture a little bit.
Yeah, especially with DNA, because like, especially like you know, like when I was reading that book about the word Igorot by Henry Scott, and he was talking about like how there were so many lowlanders who actually escaped. Well, during the Spaniards' time, and also during the when everybody was getting killed in the you know when when the Americans were killing everybody over there, and so like everybody was running up to the mountains to get away. So and that was like such a common thing, like for people to just run up in the mountains to get away, and so that would be considered back migration, I guess.
What is happening with Cordilleran autonomy? Have you gotten word from your inside sources? Is it ever going to happen?
God, that's been going on for ages. Yeah, good question.
Not as
Yeah.
long as there's resources up there, I don't think.
Yeah,
Those
they're not
natural
gonna
resources are
let-
too precious for people, apparently. No.
I
Gerald.
asked one
Seeing-
person.
Oh,
I
sorry. go
asked
ahead.
one person who wrote a little bit about that, about the Cordillera Autonomous Region. And I asked him, so why is the Moros have their autonomy now? Bangsamoro had it, but why the Cordillera not? They started off 1987, same time. And he said, because the Cordillera people are not as violent as the people in Mindanao.
Oh,
There's not
really?
as much violence in the Cordillera now. I think what the NPA has toned down a little bit, and there was another armed group of Cordillerans. I forget the name, Cordilleran Liberation something. And they toned down. So
Yeah.
I mean, it
that's what
might
I
be
was told.
there's simply the access to, overseas workers, money, education, and it's changed our ability to. It might have just changed the will because we have
Right.
different access as opposed to the folks in
Yeah.
the south.
Yeah, that's possible. Plus, those two areas, the Bangsamoro and the Cordillera Administrative, were of course the areas controlled by the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes in Worcester's time. But
Oh.
Bangsamoro is still Muslim, but the Cordillera is no longer pagan. It's now Christian.
Yeah, largely.
Yes, so there's no, well, of course, there wouldn't be any religious identification among the pagans anyway. They each had their own thing versus the Muslims. But if
Yeah.
religion was a unifying force for the Bangsamoro, it's not a unifying force for the Cordillera.
Hmm.
Yeah, because there's a mixed Protestant group there too.
It's Father Oaks' fault.
Gerald, were you going to say something about that? Like, because Gerald was probably there most recently when the IIC happened.
There wasn't really an update. I know it's still a project. It's in process, but I know if I heard correctly, the people from Kalinga or representatives from Kalinga wanted to make to book like a capital of that. That was right, but they're still working on it. I don't really know what's going on there. That's all I heard.
What are some of the Chinese influences in the Cordillera? If there
That's
are
a good
any.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. My grandfather wrote way back in 1898, I guess, that he found very little Chinese influence in the Cordillera. He strangely found some Japanese influence.
Hmm.
He said there are some Nabaloy words that are Japanese words. How that happened, who knows? But he doesn't think Limahong's people made it into the Cordillera after they got kicked out by the Spanish.
Really?
Yeah, well, that's what he figured. Well, but of course he was just in Benguet. I don't know about the other people. There were actually attempts to resettle Muslims in the eastern foothills of the Cordillera. The Spaniards brought Muslims over there. I don't know what happened to those.
Would the
colonies.
Spaniards brought them there? They just said go over here and
Exiled them, I guess, or something like
exiled
that.
them.
Oh, right.
That's interesting. I mean,
Well, some of the Cordilleran costumes look very Muslim. They're very
yeah. Well,
decorative, and they have
did you say on the east side, closer to like the Cagayan area?
on the east side, right? Yeah, in the
Oh.
foothills of the
Yeah, and you look
Cagayan
at the way they dress and their style, like with the coats and stuff like that, and the upper. It is very like. That's why every time we were thinking, when I was in my university years and I was researching the different groups and the way they dress and stuff like that, it's like, man, these guys seem like they have some kind of, at least they're influenced maybe by in dress by the Muslims nearby, or maybe it was trade, because it was maybe they
possibly
traded.
trade as well. Yeah,
So
possibly
they
trade.
possibly traded clothing, for whatever. So that's, I mean, like, who knows? It's possible that you wonder if some of them also went to Apaya because the way they dress.
Yeah, yeah.
What year was that when they moved all those Muslim people away?
Well, Spanish time, so I figure maybe 17th century, 18th century. I'd have to look up the reference.
Huh.
It's not. Yeah. They resettled Muslims over there. Now I talked to Lawrence Reed, and he said, no, there's no evidence of Muslim influence in the Cordilleran languages.
At least not in the language and not in the spirituality, right? Like they just, but
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
in the clothing.
Maybe the
Just
clothing.
because of through trade, just through trade.
Yeah, may have been trade. Yeah, who knows?
So really, they're saying most of the researchers say that there wasn't that much Chinese influence.
Right, in the Cordillera. Oh no, just my grandfather. That's all I'm saying. My grandfather did not find in Benguet
on Benguet, okay,
Chinese influence.
That's interesting. I mean, like, obviously, most people say that the gongs were the gongs that we play were influenced by the Chinese, but I mean, it's
through Taiwan. I don't know.
Yeah. Do they also play gongs as well?
Yeah, they did. Remember in the Sidak Bali?
I believe they do.
They had their own. Yeah, they had their own. They had metal work. They were very
flat
very
gongs,
well known
the same way that we play.
Yeah.
Oh, was it
very
more
different from the Malaysian style of like the southern?
So more like flat gongs.
Yeah. Well, I just know that they were very well known with their like blacksmithing. That's why they had those, like,
with
swords
metalwork and
whatnot.
stuff like that.
Yeah, but like their instruments were very different compared to like the Malay, Indo influenced ones from the southern Philippines. It was very similar to ours, from what I saw. But I could be wrong. I can look it up right now, actually.
Yeah, it's hard to say where it came from first. Like a lot of
I'm
the
thinking
folks
it came from Taiwan. I'm thinking.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been a mix of everything. Like, definitely the rhythm patterns, I think, are the call and response. That's definitely very similar to the way that they sing. And a lot of the older folks told me that, like, because to have gongs in general, they didn't. Not everybody could afford the gongs, and to have gongs was like that was a big deal. You know, you had to own land, and you had to trade a piece. You know, you had to trade to even get a gong, and a quality gong. You had to find a good. You know, unless you're one of the smiths and can make it. You know, but yeah, they said that a lot of the old folks, if there's a village in Ili that doesn't have one, they're either going to borrow somebody else's, but for practice or just playing in their ato, they just use rhythms on the body. They're just slapping the body, or slap using the hands, or they use the bamboo instruments. So, yeah, I don't know if they came around, you know, if the introduction of gongs came around the same time that they're innovating certain rhythm patterns, or they came after because they're like, because you know the sounding of the gongs is connected to like the prayers, like how they ring out, and usually like if you're playing something that's wooden, that's it doesn't ring out as much, you know. So the preference was towards gongs because it could carry the prayers out to make the prayers move forward. And so I don't know. I don't. I wish that there was some kind of research on that, and maybe there is that I just don't know of yet. Unless you know, doctor, that you've heard of.
No, not about the gong. I learned all my gong stuff from you.
And we will play again.
Okay. Before you gave that talk, I had no idea that there were 3 separate rhythms going on.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Well, I figured out a way to kind of like share them in a way that people can kind of understand, because usually sometimes like the old folks is they're just some people can learn this way too. They just call out the sound, but not everybody learns that way. So especially those who kind of grew up through Western background or Western education system, they learn differently. Is what I found, versus the more, I guess, almost the more natural way of just follow, and which is the way most of our like our parents and everybody and anybody before in the Philippines like usually has that kind of ability of just follow, just learn by watching, learn by listening, versus like a step-by-step approach or something like that. And I think that has a lot to do with the development of a certain part of the brain as you're growing. You know, the
Nice.
ability to learn by just following and just listening. And I'd say I maybe from playing guitar and stuff like that, I've learned that. But you know, in terms of like watching my dad how to fix the car, what didn't help me at all.
But it seems like the gong playing is not going to go away because a lot of young people know how to play the gongs now.
Now, yeah.
So they're being taught. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
That
newfound
skill is going.
pride. There's a newfound pride amongst the people and the arts, dance and singing, and that's like the way that our culture is gonna maintain and carry forward from now.
One of the
Have you
easiest
ever gotten a
things.
Yeah, the
hold of?
easiest way. Yeah.
Right. Have you ever gotten a hold of an old gong,
Yeah.
a 200-year-old gong? How do they sound? Do they sound
Not
the same
that
as
old, but I
Heavy. Very
yeah,
heavy.
the oldest ones I played, which
It'd be 100 years old now.
yeah, probably be around 100 years old. Like they're heavy. Yeah, as Jay said, they're super heavy, and usually they have like a little bit of, they add a little bit of gold, and I don't know what it is with the resonance of gold. It's all about how they mix the different metals. Some of them have silver, some of them have a little bit of gold, but the old ones are super heavy. And compared to the ones now, like the ones now are actually quite good. You know, they have a good mixture from what I can tell. But the really good ones, depending on the style, if you're playing with the stick, like the nice heavy ones, like the old ones, you just barely, you don't have to try. Like even an amateur can just start playing and it's like, oh wow, it sounds really good already from the start. They can articulate the sound really well. But then like with the new gongs, they just don't have that quality. Probably because there's not gold in it.
And it's probably the metal, because what the metal does is it holds the energy and it just resonates. The vibration resonates. It has so much more to travel through that it actually holds the energy, and it allows a much more controlled kind of thing, because you don't have to hit it hard at all. It's very light, and then you'll make this deeper sound. It makes a really deep sound. The only the other issue is that it's so heavy that you can't really play it that long.
But the old men are so strong, it doesn't even matter. For us, it's heavy.
For us, because we're weaker, actually. We're just physically weaker than those guys. But if you notice how they play, they will hold it. They will hold it up to their body, so that they don't stick it out like the way we do it. You stick it out. They just hold it to their body.
Well, it depends.
And that's probably how they would have played that thing for a while. But yeah, just the weight was significant. I remember that.
And they're just easier to play. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and the jawbone. Yeah, there's a jawbone.
You had one with the jawbone. Okay.
Yeah, jawbone on the handle.
Yeah.
So it meant business.
It was somebody along the way.
So those old gongs are like the Stradivarius violin. You know they sound good, but you don't know how they did it.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
You have to know the mixture of the metals, and obviously someone who's been crafting for a long time, they would know. But you know, I don't know if they would easily give that out. Yeah, but they're fun to play with. I'll tell you that. They just sound so good, and especially if they have a pair, because usually when you're playing, you have the arwas is the call and response. So you need mainly two to create, at least where we're from in Mountain Province. You at least need the two to make that sound, boom, 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 which is like in modern music what they consider like a minor third. About, I don't know if I actually did that right interval, but it's usually about a minor third. And like if you could just have those two pairs, then it doesn't matter about everybody else. They can kind of just fit in.
That carries the rhythm, huh?
Yeah, so you got two really nice old, like heavy, dense gongs, and man, you got something really fun to play with over there.
Where did you play with these?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Where did you play with these?
Well, one of the uncles in our group had, well, he had the one with the jaw.
Actually, yeah, and, one of our uncles in San Diego.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, actually, our real uncle
Uh-huh.
in San Diego. Not just the uncle that you say. That's a that actual, one of
Right.
our genuine uncles had it.
So
But
that was
there's
just
also
passed down.
one
type
of
thing?
one of the uncles who's
yeah.
not really related. He might be, but I'm not sure. But like he also has one on in Bibac of Northern California. He has a really old one too. And,
Well, who's that? Who's...
Dontogan.
Oh, right.
Like their family has an old one, and man, that one plays. I love playing that one. But unfortunately, he doesn't have the pair, so you have to find a good one. You played it, Ken?
No, I'm just curious how far the ringing would travel.
Oh yeah.
The ones I had some that my father-in-law had made. It was like one of the last batch that was made by this master gong maker before he died, and we played those during my dawak, which is the wedding ritual in Baguio. We held it in Baguio in 2004, and man, we played that set all night. And the bass on those gongs was like boom. Like you can just it just rings, and I don't know, you can walk out a mile and you can hear it.
Yeah.
That's how resonant it was, and the set was really heavy to play, but it was a fun one. I haven't my that's the set that my father-in-law really he kind of keeps, so he rarely takes that one out unless it's for like a big. I think the last time he took it out was maybe during Ingrid's wedding, my sister-in-law's wedding. So
Don't you think that would be a good idea for you to gather these gongs and make a video and explain all about the gongs and how the 100-year-old gong sounds better than the current gong? So
that actually would be that would be a great video.
Yeah, I'd love to play it.
Great video.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to do a video with Mark about gongs for a long time, but we're a little far right now.
Yeah. We can do a beginner's one, obviously, because I did make a video a long time ago for a group of folks in a workshop that I did, and one of the issues was that these guys don't have gongs when they go home. So I made a short video about how to play the gong, learn how to articulate the gong, even though you don't have a gong. So so I think that would probably be the first video to make, because like if you can learn to articulate the gong, basically how to ring it properly and how to cut the sound off, because there's two sounds. It's like you either rung or cut off. If you can learn how to do that, then you can join in any circle, to play. The next part would be, that's just playing the gong now. The next part would be to move in rhythm with everybody and kind of understand like the principle of that certain dance. So that would, we could, but just playing in general is not easy for everybody. It looks easy outside, but when people start playing it and then dancing, then everybody's messed up.
But you've got 3 different rhythms going at the same time, right?
Yeah.
You have to keep your rhythm and not,
exactly, because they don't know to listen to theirs or to somebody else's, and then it's definitely a mindfulness practice. I'll tell you that. The Gangsa playing. I always tell people this is actually this itself is a tool for mindfulness, and it kind of makes sense, because like one of the old folks told me, like, so we have this dance called balangbang, and that dance, it traditionally was done like after headhunting trip. So you come back into the village and they start playing the balangbang, like everyone starts to celebrate because they come home from the successful headhunting trip. So once you hear that, everybody knows what's going on. But part of that function of playing was almost to kind of ease the mind, especially for the ones who had their first kill. So it's kind of to prevent PTSD. So emotionally, it keeps their mind focused, and it helps kind of like because when you play certain rhythms, there's a certain part in the brain that kind of lights up, and if everybody's in harmony, everybody's in that same
Same
area
part.
will light up with everybody. And I don't know what the actual name of that is, but that kind of harmony is the kind of what this dancing and this kind of uh, playing of music does. So it's kind of fascinating because like, oh wow, so when my uncle told me that, I said, wow, so this is kind of like prevention of PTSD is like one of the psychological functions of the dance itself, for
Like,
coming back from war.
Musical debrief.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Focus, not a focus.
The focus, to keep your mind focused, and to kind of like there's something about it, like when I guess it affects you psychologically to know that you're a part of something that's bigger than you, and you connect to the music.
Well, that's true, because one of the healing salves in PTSD therapy actually has to do with music, the creation of it, and so.
Oh yeah, you're military guy. So is that what they're doing for therapy now?
In some places they do. It's a creation of music. They use drum circles. That's how they do it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so that has been in some places been very useful for a lot of people, because the drums resonate a certain vibration that seems to it goes through the body. It literally goes through the body. So not only are you playing with other people and putting your mind in a place outside of that memory, you're putting it into the present, but you're also the vibrations. It allows a certain way of healing. It allows a certain flow to return back to a person's very primal. So that's what they found in drum circle therapies. So you can imagine also, I think that the same concept would also fall into with gongs.
Yeah. Interesting. There's a whole, you can go really deep in that and just keep on going. It's just like language, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
No problem.
Dr. Shear, you mentioned that you're retired, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So what are you doing now? Besides
Well,
working?
principally, I'm writing that book, but in the process of writing that book, ended up, people will tell me, hey, you collected all this information, talk about it. So I give talks, and my first paper on it is finally accepted for publication by, remember Mark in London?
Yes.
Yeah, the University
Oh,
of London.
the paper that you're talking about.
Yeah, so that'll come. I don't know when it'll come out, but it was accepted for publication.
Oh, that's great.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
But I guess you'll just let us know then. Just send us an
Yeah,
email.
I'll let you know. It's going to be a while. I think the editor finally wrote me and said, "Okay, you've done your part. I'll finish the editing on my end." So thank God. You know how hard it is to do simple thing like citations. They got so many rules.
Oh,
Right.
jeez. Yeah.
Right.
When I look at some
Wow.
of these academia books and the amount of citations, which is good, it's just
Yeah.
like golly, the work
I
to
can't-
do that. Just
Yeah,
I can't even read it.
just to do it. It's,
can't even-
it's-
yeah.
it's-
It does make
just
it hard
like-
to read.
What's the title of this article?
Okay, I took my title from a newspaper article that Worcester published in 1908. His newspaper article was titled "Headhunters Under the Stars and Stripes," and it was basically him congratulating himself for what he managed to do in 8 years that the Spanish were not able to do in 300.
Wow. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But the whole thing was that he was doing this to prevent Philippine independence. He was trying to separate the Cordillera and its people from the rest of the Philippines, so he could claim that there was no Philippine nation.
Wow.
There's no such thing as a Filipino, so there couldn't be a Philippine nation.
So I guess that can connect to like the human zoos, like the like St. Louis and all those other.
Yeah, St. Louis. The very first one was actually Madrid. And
Right.
the Ilustrados there complained bitterly about it, about them. They displayed the Igorots, the Spanish displayed the Igorots in the Madrid Zoo.
Right.
Oh wow.
And Luna was so mad because one time he was walking along Madrid and the Spaniards pointed to him and said, Igorot, Igorot.
Yeah.
So Igorot became an insult, became a pejorative for a very long time. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
uncivilized, whatever word you want to use. The Spanish use salvaje or savage.
It was
or
Jose Rizal who
inquieta.
said. Jose Rizal said
Yeah,
something
so Rizal was
really.
very mad. He wrote to Blumentritt and said, "Well, one of them died. I wish they had all died."
Oh man.
That's what
Oh,
Rizal
wow.
wrote. Yeah, because they were they were giving the false impression of what Filipinos are like, whereas he, nicely dressed, and all the other people there, Viola and Lopez and all those people were trying to project an image of very educated, civilized people, so that they would be given representation in the Spanish Cortes.
Mm. That's what he really wanted, right? Was
Yeah, what he wanted was representation in the Cortes. He wasn't really into independence
Mhm.
till very
So
late.
wasn't his legend mostly like manufactured by Americans also?
Well, what the claim is that because he was a pacifist, because he was against the revolution, the Americans made him they elevated him to national hero status versus the warriors, Bonifacio or Aguinaldo or something. They'd point to Rizal and say, "See, this was the pacifist."
Interesting.
Yeah,
Oh,
they said Bonifacio sent people to Rizal. Rizal was in exile in Dapitan, and Bonifacio sent people to him asking Rizal to support the revolution that Bonifacio was about to start. And Rizal said, "No, I won't." Because he didn't think the Filipinos were ready to be independent.
That's right.
yes,
I'm
yes.
reading that.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, history.
Oh, fun
history.
Philippine history.
Oh, it's so layered. Oh, it's paradoxical too.
Yeah, it's so layered. Yeah. And then as you
Yes.
talk about this, it's kind of like, oh wow. And then you can kind of like see how it connects within, at least for me, like how it connects into the context of our people, like how this all kind of like interweaving happens. And it's really interesting to note like how they all the boundaries were just politicized just so that to prevent independence. And it's interesting that Luna actually he wanted to protect the Cordillera.
Yeah, he did.
So
He went up to Baguio. My grandfather met him.
mhm.
There's a personal story there I won't relate, but he was up there. He was directing the defenses of the Cordillera. He was setting up the defenses.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
that's a
That's-
looking forward
Who
to
knows
that.
what would happen if Aguinaldo didn't have him killed?
Ah, jeez.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the Luna brothers were temperamental. They were tarantados. That's probably why Aguinaldo wanted to get him, because Luna was getting too big for his britches. His brother, Juan Luna, killed his wife,
Oh,
murdered
Oh
his
my
wife in
gosh.
Paris. His wife and his mother-in-law. And his wife and his mother-in-law was the mother of T.H. Pardo de Tavera, who was, of course, one of the big leaders in the Philippines at that time. He formed the pro-American party, the Federalista Party.
that's
So
right.
Luna
It's been a while since
T.H. Pardo de Tavera's sister was Juan Luna's wife, and Juan Luna murdered her in Paris and got away with it because he said she was cheating on him. And in France, that is a good excuse to kill your wife.
Wow.
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 Yeah, so he got away with it. He wasn't convicted or anything.
Wow.
Man.
That's all the fun
the
fun
drama.
Philippine history trivia. The drama.
Yeah, it's
True.
Wow. That definitely sounds Filipino.
yeah, definitely. And
So
there's
we
a,
Teleseria.
I think you go on net. Is it on Netflix? That
There's a General Luna movie.
yeah,
Oh
Luna.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I
I haven't watched
didn't
it.
want to watch that.
Yeah, you can get that on Netflix. Yeah, it's pretty.
Are they
Pretty
pretty good with
accurate.
that accuracy on
Is
that?
it actually?
Yeah, there was one of the early scenes was not right because they had all the big names gathered together, and then somebody burst in and said the Americans took Manila. But when the Americans took Manila, those people were not gathered together yet. That
Oh.
came later, but only by a couple of months. So not a big deal. Made for a dramatic scene. They're all there.
Yeah.
all big names.
And all the star players.
Yeah.
You mean all the people on the money?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
all the people who are uh, militaristic versus the people who are not. The people who wanted peace with the Americans and autonomy or some kind of cohabitation with the Americans versus Luna, who would have nothing to do with it. He wanted to fight.
His family,
So
were they in terms of
Illocano,
class, what was their class?
they must have been upper class because they were both in Europe. Both Antonio and Juan Luna were in Europe.
Oh,
They
they
were
had to
sent to
be.
Europe to
So they're
study.
Ilustrado class.
Yeah, very illustrated.
Wow, interesting.
So we've been
Well,
going for
Yeah.
a while now. Does anybody have any leftover questions for Dr. Scheer here? That
You must be running out of tape or, or megabytes.
I had it for 5
Yeah.
hours, so
I'm
My
okay.
camera's gonna die soon.
All right. So
well, Gerald's the one that's recording it, so
yeah, I'm
Well,
good.
it's late in London. Yeah, just edit it. Take out all the stuff that's wrong or irrelevant.
Exactly.
Great presentation,
Exactly.
though. Wonderful
Yeah,
presentation.
amazing.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up here, usually I do a question to everyone just to wrap up. I think today I'm just gonna ask. I mean, I don't know if everybody here has gone to every single area in the Cordilleras. I personally haven't. So, if there was a place that you wanted to visit there, where would it be and why? And if you've been to all of them, where would you go back and why? For myself, I mean, there's quite a few that I haven't been to yet. Places like the rice terraces I haven't been to yet. But personally, I'd go back to Apayao, even though I was there earlier this year, actually. But I didn't get a chance to really. I don't know. I was with family mostly, and didn't get a chance to do some research and talk to some elders or get connected to some ISNIC people. So, yeah, that's where I would go. Let's see, Mark, where would you go?
For me, actually, I'll go to Apayao and Kalinga. Sorry, those are two places, but like those are the places I haven't visited yet. So, you know, I just would love to visit just to have exposure to the culture and talk to some folks. You know, may it be popular to see Upper Wangud. You know,
Yeah.
that'd be one thing. I know that's kind of like everybody wants to go see her, right? But like that, those are the main places I haven't been to. So you know, maybe during a festival time. Of course, I wish I could have gone to the IIC, but then I couldn't make it, so I missed out on that one.
Yeah. If you want to go there, February 14th, Valentine's Day is there. Both Abayo and Kalinga Day, right? Lots of festivities
Kalinga Day.
around that time. So,
that would be the time.
yeah, that's when I would want to go.
Well, maybe we can plan a big, I don't know,
Trip out there.
a visitation. I don't know.
Research trip.
Yeah, for research purposes, I mean, if I can find some grant money.
Perfect.
That's one way. You know.
All right, Ido.
I would say probably Kalinga, but like last year, that was my first time back in a really really long time, and I did like a whole circuit. First, obviously, Baguio, then we went up to Mountain Province and then Ifugao, but we didn't go up to Kalinga, which was what we were supposed to do. But I would probably say Kalinga, but honestly, because even though I went back home, I went to my mom's place in Kabayan, but I didn't go back to Baguio. So, or sorry, not Baguio, but Bukod. So I'd probably go back to Bukod. That's my first place to go. My dad's home.
Nice. Dr. Shear?
I guess I'd go to Mount Data, which is the source of the four major rivers in the Cordillera.
Oh yeah.
They all originate in Mount Data. So I'd probably go there just to see where, physically see the source. And then
Follow the
Mount
river.
Kapingan is sort of in that area.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Very interesting.
I was saying you can walk the river.
Yeah, right. If I
Wow.
had another 20 years of life left in me, I could probably. I went to the Amburayan River. That was kind of fun. That was a nice trip.
Wow, nice.
I wonder what
Yeah.
kind of fish you could find in those
Okay.
rivers.
Yeah,
Not much.
actually.
They're only little
Really?
teeny weeny fish. Yeah. It's
Huh.
not the big fish thing.
All right. Ken?
Well, I haven't been to the Cordillera yet, so I want to probably just check out my mom's place in, my mom's family's place in Mountain Province. I think
Masla.
in Masla, and I think grandma was from Lubon.
Mm,
Is that
yeah.
right? So
Or
those
just
two areas.
Tajan in general.
Oh
Tajan.
yeah, that
Yeah.
region. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but they moved down to Polipol, but their original kind of area where they started. So that'd be great to look at and just to be exposed to maybe the weavings and the gongs and the whole thing. So yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. All right, Jay.
I want to go to Mankayan, where they make the gongs, and go follow, kind of like just to see how they make them, play some, maybe pick some up, uh, and then also try to follow where there are other places where they make gongs, maybe
Oh
Lepanto,
yeah.
and just see how that tradition has continued. Um, the other thing I'd be very curious of if that's something that could be replicated over here. Um, but I mean, I don't have access to anything like a smelter or something like that. But people have been doing this kind of work without such things, hammering these things out for centuries. So I'm just wondering. I would love to, if I had the time, to study that and then bring it, do some of that in America.
Oh yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess we can conclude this now. We have hit our 3-hour mark. We've passed it actually.
Oh,
So time just
I
flies.
hope you enjoyed, Dr. Shearer.
Yeah,
time
time
flies. Time flies.
time flies when we do these things. So yeah.
Definitely.
So I guess thank you everybody for joining, for watching this. In the future, whenever I get it edited and out. Thank you, Dr. Shearer, for sharing your knowledge. Thank you, Kenneth, for joining us on this. So yeah, I'm super excited to see or to make more of these and see who else we can get on this next season. I'm going to call it next season because we're recording these instead of doing them all live. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.